When the last light in your room fades, when only your heartbeat and the whisper of the wind remain, that's when the stories begin to wake. Each night, we tell you something strange, something that shouldn't have happened, yet did. A truth that lingers long after the sound fades. So lay back, close your eyes, and if you hear someone softly calling your name, don't answer. Story 1. I'm blind, but yesterday, miraculously, I regained my sight. I was about to tell my parents the good news when I noticed something under my bed. A crumpled tissue. On it, in messy handwriting, were the words, "Don't tell them you can see." I lost my sight years ago. To make things easier for me, my parents moved us out of the city to a quiet house deep in the suburbs. Last night, something miraculous happened. I could see again. I was about to tell them the good news when I noticed something strange under my bed. A crumpled tissue. I'm a neat freak, so I picked it up without thinking. There were words scrawled across it in shaky, frantic handwriting. "Don't tell them you can see." The handwriting looked rushed, almost terrified. There's no one else here but my parents and my husband, Ethan. So who could have written it? And who were they? Just then, someone knocked on the door. "Lena, sweetheart, I made you some soup," came my mother's gentle voice from the other side. I tossed the tissue into the trash and opened the door, and froze. A woman stood there, smiling sweetly, holding a steaming bowl. But she wasn't my mother. Her lipstick was blood red, her smile too wide, too fixed. Her face wasn't familiar at all. I stumbled back, heart pounding. My mother's face had always been soft, kind. This woman's features were sharp, almost predatory, and yet her voice sounded exactly like my mom's. Before I could say anything, the words on the tissue flashed through my mind. "Don't let them know you can see." "Lena, what's wrong? You look pale," the woman said softly, stepping closer. "I'm fine," I murmured, pretending to grope for the bed. "Just a little tired." She smiled again. "Then let me feed you the soup, honey. You shouldn't strain yourself." "No, thank you," I said quickly. "I think I'll nap first." She nodded and left quietly, closing the door behind her. Only when she was gone did I realize my back was soaked in cold sweat. If that woman wasn't my mom, then where was she? I needed to find out. I cracked the door open and stepped into the hall. It was the first time I'd truly seen the house since moving here. A big 2-story home, filled with pale light and silence. From the stairs, I saw a man sitting in the living room, reading a newspaper. He looked like my father from behind. "Dad?" I called softly. He turned around, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't my father. The face was wrong, completely unfamiliar. But when he spoke, his voice was identical. "Lena, what's the matter?" I forced a shaky smile. "Nothing, Dad." Then the woman appeared again at the doorway, her red lips curling into that awful, overdone smile. "I thought you were going to sleep, dear." "Actually, I'm not that tired anymore," I said carefully. "Then have some soup, sweetheart," she insisted, bringing the bowl over. She fed me spoon by spoon, and I forced myself to stay calm, pretending to be blind. Each swallow burned with dread. I couldn't tell if there was something else in that soup. Her voice stayed gentle. "Lena, you're sweating so much. Are you sure you're okay?" She leaned closer, her wide eyes staring directly into mine. Too wide, too white. Her pupils tiny, shrunken dots. "I'm fine," I whispered. "I just wish I knew when my sight will come back." Her lips stretched into another false smile. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You'll recover soon." When she finally left, I locked the door behind her and sat frozen on the bed. 2 weeks ago, Ethan, my husband, had visited. He's a pilot, always flying. That day, he'd shared drinks with my parents and stayed overnight, which meant 2 weeks ago, my real parents were still here. I grabbed my phone, still set to voice mode from before, and called Ethan. He answered right away. "Lena? Hey, what's wrong? I just landed. Want me to come by?" "Ethan," I said quickly. "Something's happening here. You might not believe it, but please listen." He paused, then said firmly, "Lena, if you say it's real, I'll believe you." I told him everything, every detail. He didn't question a word. "I'm coming now," he said. "An hour tops." I felt a flicker of hope, then another knock. "Lena, it's time for your medicine," came my father's voice, but I knew it wasn't him. My heart hammered. I said nothing. The doorknob rattled. "Why's the door locked, sweetheart?" "You need your pills if you ever want your sight back." He sounded patient, almost kind, but the voice trembled just a little. I pressed my back against the wall, too terrified to answer. "Sleeping already?" He chuckled softly. "Good girl." His footsteps finally faded down the hall. I exhaled in relief, until something cold crawled up my spine. That feeling again, being watched. I crept close to the door and bent down, peering through the crack at the bottom, and froze. Two white eyes stared right back at me. The pupils, tiny, trembling dots, belonged to the man outside. He was lying flat on the floor, face pressed against the gap, staring straight at me. The moment our eyes met through that narrow crack beneath the door, cold sweat drenched my entire body. I pretended not to notice anything, fumbling across the floor. "How strange," I murmured shakily. I could have sworn I dropped my phone around here somewhere. The eyes vanished. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Something was horribly wrong. Those two people, whatever they were, had appeared beside me for a reason, and that reason couldn't be good. I didn't know what had happened to my parents. The only thing keeping me sane was the thought that Ethan, my husband, was on his way. After what felt like an eternity, my phone rang. "Mia, where are you?" Ethan's voice came through, tight with worry. His question made my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "I'm at the house, the same suburban place you visited, remember?" "Mia?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "I am at the house. I'm standing in the living room right now, but there's no one here. Not you, not your parents. The place looks abandoned. There's dust everywhere." My heart skipped. He sent a photo. It was our house, but not as I knew it. The same furniture, the same layout, except everything was coated in thick dust, the air stale and empty, as if no one had lived there for years. "Ethan, that can't be right," I whispered. "I'm here now. Everything's clean." I remembered the newspaper the man had been reading earlier and asked Ethan to check the table. Seconds later, another photo came through today's newspaper. The same one. My hand trembled. "Ethan, what's happening? Am I even still alive?" I sobbed. "Don't say that," he urged. "Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out. I've already called the police. Just listen carefully. Don't let them know you can see. Understand?" I nodded through tears. "Keep your phone on," he added. "How much battery do you have left?" I checked, only 15%. Damn it. I searched frantically for my charger, but it was nowhere in the room. Then I remembered I'd left it downstairs on the dining table last night, before everything went wrong. "I have to go downstairs to get my charger," I whispered. The hallway was silent. I crept out, step by step, praying the imposters were still in my parents' room. The dining room was empty. My charger was right there. Relief flooded me until I sensed someone behind me. I turned. The woman stood inches from my face, smiling that same twisted smile. "Mia," she said softly, "you came down those stairs awfully fast. Does that mean you can see again?" Fear surged through me like fire. "No, Mom," I stammered. "I just didn't want my phone to die. You know the layout, I can move around fine." Her lips curled. She reached out, tracing my cheek with icy fingers. "Oh, sweet girl. For a moment you almost made me happy." Then, in a lilting whisper, "But if you could see, you wouldn't keep that secret from us, would you? That would make us very sad." She smiled wider. "Now hand me your phone. I'll charge it for you." I hesitated, then obeyed. She glanced at the screen. "Still talking to Ethan?" Before I could react, Ethan's voice came through the speaker, steady but quick. "Hi, Mom. I was just saying I took 2 weeks off work so I can stay with Mia." The woman chuckled, too sweet, too deliberate. "That's wonderful, dear. Your father's making your favorite braised pork. Come soon, won't you? I'll hang up now. Charging while on a call is dangerous." Her tone was gentle, almost motherly, but her eyes never looked at the phone. They stayed locked on me the entire time. When she finally left, I collapsed, trembling. If Ethan couldn't find this house, then I had to get out. I decided to charge the phone to at least 30%, then escape. That's when I heard it creak. The sound came from the kitchen. I turned my head. A cabinet door was slowly swinging open. Something pale hung from inside a pair of limp, lifeless hands. A dark mole on one finger made my stomach drop. Those were my mother's hands. My eyes blurred with tears as I stepped closer. Her skin was cold. Blue. She wasn't missing, she'd been killed. And these monsters had hidden her here. Before I could run, a shadow moved. The man was there, smiling faintly, a knife glinting in his hand. "Mia, what are you doing in here?" he asked softly. "Your eyes look red. Have you been crying?" He raised the knife. The blade aimed directly at my eye. Instinct screamed at me to move, but I didn't. I forced myself to stay still. If he thought I could see, I'd be dead. The knife stopped an inch from my face. He studied me for a long moment, then lowered it. "That's my girl," he said, smiling. "Your mom told me Ethan's coming soon. I'd better finish cooking." He turned, opened the cabinet, and my mother's head rolled out, landing by my feet. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared straight at me. I almost screamed, but I had to play blind. I forced a smile. "Okay, Dad, what happened next?" Made my blood curdle. He lifted her body from the cabinet like a butcher handling meat. "Got us a nice black pig tonight," he said cheerfully. "Ethan's going to love it." "Hen." He raised the knife high and brought it down hard. The sound made my stomach twist. I wanted to run, but he turned, grinning. "Mia, be a dear and hold this steady for me, will you?" He was testing me, watching my every move. I swallowed hard. "Dad, I'm feeling dizzy. I think I'll lie down for a while." He waved the knife. "Sure thing, sweetheart. Rest up." Back in my room, I locked the door and broke down completely. My mother was gone. Probably my father, too. When I finally calmed enough to think, I called 911 and told them everything. They promised to arrive within 30 minutes. I hung up and locked myself in tighter. Then my phone rang again. "Ethan." "Mia, are you okay?" "I saw her," I whispered. "They killed my mother." He was silent for a long moment, then softly, "Mia, listen to me. I know it's hard, but you have to survive. Just hold on until the police get there." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Half an hour. I could survive half an hour. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. "Mia," the man called gently. "Dinner's ready. Come taste it." My skin crawled. "Dad, I'm not hungry." Then the woman's voice joined in. "Mia, come on out. Let Mom give your eyes a nice massage. The doctor said it'll help you heal faster." "I just want to be alone," I choked out. The sound of a key turning made my heart drop. She had a key. The doorknob began to turn. I dove under the bed. There, on the underside of the wooden frame, were words, hundreds of them scribbled in black ink. Before I could read them, the door creaked open. "Mia," the woman's voice cooed. "Where are you, sweetheart? Playing hide and seek with Mommy and Daddy?" I covered my mouth, holding my breath. The closet door opened. The bathroom door creaked, then silence, until two pale faces bent down and peered beneath the bed, both smiling that same monstrous grin. "I found you, Mia." I choked back a scream that clawed at my throat. "Mom, remember how we used to play hide and seek when I was little? I was just playing with you," I said, forcing a smile as I fumbled my way out from beneath the bed. I let my fingers trail across the floor like I had no sense of sight. The woman sighed, a soft, theatrical sound. "Oh, that time you hid in the pigsty, didn't you? You were filthy when I found you." Her words cut straight into me. That memory was true burned into childhood. The pigsty, the fever that followed. Mom carrying me to town because we couldn't afford a car. How did this stranger know it so precisely? She kept talking as if recounting an old sweet story. "You got a fever, and I carried you to the clinic on my back. You threw up all over me." Her mouth curved, with a sentimental look that tightened my stomach. I dug my nails hard into my palm until it hurt. Every small detail she recited was mine, too specific to be stolen or guessed. The woman reached out and stroked my hair. "Ethan, he was such a disappointment. We wanted better for you. We always hoped you'd leave him." My heart slammed. "What about Ethan? Where is he?" I heard panic in my own voice. The two of them exchanged a quick, knowing glance. The woman tested me. "Do you remember anything before the accident, Mia? You went to the airport to find Ethan and you saw him with a flight attendant. You ran off, had your accident. When you woke up, you couldn't remember him. We pretended we didn't know to keep you from being upset." I sank back onto the bed so hard the mattress sighed. That was their version. My accident. My sudden amnesia. My whole life, rearranged into something that made me the fragile one too weak to see straight. "No," I said slowly, ice creeping into my limbs. "I saw them. I saw what you are." Something like delight flared across the woman's face. She lunged forward and cradled my face as if she'd found me after a long, anxious search. "You can see? Oh, thank God." I shoved her away. "Stop pretending. You killed her. You killed my mother. You turned her into..." The words spilled out before I could stop them. "You cooked her." The man recoiled, blinked in mock confusion. "Mia, what nonsense. Your mother is right here. What body? That's disgusting." I ran to the kitchen, desperate to prove what I'd seen. The room was immaculate, no blood, no sign of the horrible scene I'd witnessed minutes earlier. On the floor, where my mind expected something monstrous, lay only a large pig's head, an ordinary, grisly cooking prop and nothing else. He shrugged helplessly. "We had a pig delivered from the farm yesterday. Your father wanted a special meal for Ethan." Oh, I tore through every drawer and cupboard, frantic, fingers leaving fingerprints on polished wood. My mother's head, her hands, everything I'd seen, gone, or hidden so well it was impossible to find. My pulse thudded like a drum in my ears. Then the woman began to cry. Real tears this time, dramatic and loud. "The doctors warned us you might have post-accident complications. We tried to be careful. We're right here, Mia. We never left you." And I stared at them, two faces that could be anyone's, two voices, perfect imitations. "What proof do you have that you are my parents?" I asked, voice hollow. She pulled her trembling phone from her pocket. I watched her fingers, small dark mole on the ring finger my mother's mole. My throat tightened. She flipped the phone to show me a photo. In the picture, we were all together, me and these two arms around each other, laughing. The timestamp read 3 months ago, before I'd gone blind. I felt cold and dizzy, stepping backward as if the floor might drop away. "It's all Ethan's fault," the man snarled suddenly, veins bulging at his neck. "If he hadn't been with that woman..." His voice was raw with anger. For a beat, I was stunned into silence. Maybe I was unwell. Maybe the accident had done more than steal my sight. Maybe I was the one seeing things. "Dad, Mom, give me some time," I said, trying to buy myself a second to think. I needed proof. I needed to find the source of the tissue note. They didn't stop me. The man nodded once, heavy with what seemed like relief. I went upstairs in a daze. All the while, the house felt like a stage, and I, a marionette, whose strings someone else clutched. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched them settle on the couch like worried parents. I snapped a photo of their faces with my phone and sent it to Ethan. He answered almost immediately. "Mia, your parents are fine? They look fine." And so were they my real parents? I walked back into my room and my whole world shifted. What if I was the sick one? What if the letters under my bed, someone else's words, were nothing but the delusions of a fractured mind? Out of desperation, I crawled back under the bed and thumbed the edge of the crumpled tissue. Then I read, in someone else's hurried, jagged handwriting, the message left for me by whoever had been here before. Mia, I left this note. I was the one in the last loop. You are repeating the same thing. This is the 5th loop. It sounds insane, but those 2 downstairs are not your parents. Don't believe anything they tell you. Don't trust Ethan either. Don't trust the photo he sent. He can fake it. At the end of each loop, you'll lose the memories of the previous one. In loop 4, I managed to keep something, and I left this note for you, someone in loop 5. Don't trust the police. They won't help you. You will die at 8 p.m. And then it will reset to the 6th loop unless you kill them first. Ethan will try to stop you. He'll make up lies to stop you. He's part of this. Or he'll be manipulated into stopping you. My hands went numb. The house clock in the hall ticked like a countdown. Outside, the afternoon was bleeding into evening. I scrolled to the top of the list of messages, checked the time, and felt the full weight of the note's final warning sink into my bones. Mia, are you still there? Ethan's voice trembled through the phone. Ethan, I have to kill them, I said calmly. No, Mia, you can't. You won't be able to. You'll regret it. I hung up before he could say another word, my pulse steady, my hand cold around the knife. The door creaked open. Downstairs, they were sitting at the dining table, eating braised pork as if nothing had happened. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. I think she doesn't really trust us, the man muttered. Maybe. We should deal with her now, the woman replied softly. Wait, did she go outside? Suddenly, the man's head snapped up, eyes locking directly on me at the top of the stairs. I jerked back instantly, breath ragged. Footsteps echoed slow, deliberate up the wooden staircase. Mia, where are you, sweetheart? The man called out. I slipped into the wardrobe, gripping the carving knife so tightly the handle dug into my palm. Cold sweat ran down my arms. Outside, thunder rolled. Through the thin crack of the door, a flash of lightning illuminated a single eye peering in. Gott. You. He yanked the door open and dragged me out. The woman grabbed my shoulders in an iron grip. Mia, why don't you trust your parents? You're sick, baby. You need help. We're taking you to the hospital. My pulse went wild. I sank my teeth into her arm, biting until she screamed and let go. Then I slashed the knife across her arm. Mia, I froze. Ethan was there standing behind me, gasping, his face pale as paper. Mia, what are you doing? They're your parents. You're sick. He threw a handful of papers at me. They scattered across the floor. I stared down. A psychiatric evaluation. Patient, Mia Baker. Diagnosis, severe psychotic delusions, hallucinations, paranoid ideation. Ethan spoke in a low, shaking voice. Mia, listen to me. I never cheated on you. That woman you saw, she fell. I helped her up. You've always been suspicious, controlling, but none of that mattered to me. You ran away before I could explain, and then the accident happened. Mia, he pleaded. Your parents worked so hard to take care of you. Put the knife down. The woman sobbed quietly beside him, blood soaking her sleeve, her face filled with heartbreak. And then, inside my head, I heard it again, those words written on the tissue. Ethan will say anything to stop you. He'll lie. He always lies. The images came flooding back, my real memories. Mom carrying me to the clinic drenched in my vomit. Dad smiling, handing me a tiny orange kitten in his calloused hands. The night he cooked for me after I got into my dream school, burning every dish but grinning through it. Faces warm, gentle, real. But those faces, they were not the ones standing before me now. No matter how they spoke, no matter what they claimed, my real parents would never make me feel this kind of dread. I made my choice. Ethan's eyes widened in horror as I swung the knife. The blade flashed, a quick silver line slicing across their throats. They didn't fight back. There was only shock, then hatred, then silence. The world shattered like glass around me. Everything dissolved, walls, furniture, light into floating fragments. Through the haze, Ethan stood motionless, his eyes fixed on me. "You did it, Mia," he said. But the voice wasn't his, it was mine. And then, Ethan vanished too. Before me stood my real parents, smiling gently, hand in hand. "Mia, you did it," Mom whispered. Tears spilled down my face. I reached for them, but they broke apart into glittering shards of light, scattering into nothing. "Epilogue. Dr. Ethan. She's awake." Ethan removed his glasses and smiled faintly. "How's her emotional response?" "She's been crying non-stop, Doctor. I think she's still adjusting. Let her stabilize. Then we'll summarize the treatment results," he said, turning to the observing interns. "Patient, Mia Baker. Female, 26. Personality, passive, compliant, deeply self-blaming. 6 months ago, she and her parents spent a weekend at their countryside villa. That night, 2 fugitives, Liam Carter and Vanessa Cole, broke into the house to rob them. They didn't expect anyone to be home, but Mia's mother woke up in the middle of the night. They murdered her instantly. Mia's father woke at the scream, rushed to his daughter's room, and hid her under the bed. He whispered, "Don't be afraid." Moments later, he was killed too. Mia lay under the bed silent, her eyes open wide, watching everything. When the police arrived, she was the only survivor. Ethan adjusted his glasses. Since then, she suffered from survivor's guilt, self-blame, and dissociative psychosis. She created delusions believing her parents were still alive, but wearing the faces of the killers. To treat her, I used deep hypnosis. Inside her subconscious, I appeared as her husband, her protector, her rational mind. When she witnessed her father's death, her survival instinct fractured into 2 parts, fear and guilt. That's why, in her mind, Ethan kept stopping her from facing the truth. But she finally confronted it, killed the false parents, and forgave herself. An intern raised a hand. "Dr. Ethan, what about the identical house she kept describing?" Ethan smiled faintly. "That's the villa where the murders happened." Her mind recreated it in an endless loop until she broke free. He turned toward the patient room. Through the glass, Mia sat on the bed, tears streaking her face, but her eyes were clear now. He knew she was finally free. Because sometimes the greatest horror is learning to forgive yourself for surviving. Story 2. It began, as most bad nights do, with a phone call he almost ignored. Jacob was halfway through closing his shop, sweeping metal shavings from the counter when the phone rang. It was late past midnight and the wind outside had the kind of sharp, dry hiss that made the street sound deserted. He hesitated, glancing toward the back door where the old furnace hummed quietly, melting down scrap brass for the next day's work. No one called this late unless it was trouble. He picked up anyway. "Jacob's lock and key," he said, voice low, tired. A woman's voice came through, urgent but measured. "I need a locksmith tonight. Right now, if possible." He started to explain that after hours cost more, that most emergencies could wait until morning, but something in her tone stopped him. It wasn't panic exactly, just a kind of brittle restraint, as though she were keeping something awful from breaking through. "What's the address?" he asked. She gave it. A quiet suburban street about 20 minutes away, near the edge of town. "It's my house," she said. "I need every lock replaced. Tonight." "That's a big job for one night," he said, already scribbling the address. "I'll pay whatever it costs." He paused. "May I ask why?" There was a silence, the faintest sound of breathing, then, "I lost a key. The key to the basement." Something in the way she said basement made him shiver, though he couldn't have said why. "I can be there in 30 minutes, he told her. When he hung up, the shop felt colder. He turned off the furnace, packed his tools into the van, and drove. The neighborhood was quiet when he arrived. No cars, no dogs, no lights except the one from her porch, flickering as though struggling to stay lit. The house itself was old but tidy. 2 stories with a gable window and pale wooden siding that glowed faintly under the street lamp. She met him at the door. Mid-30s, dark hair tied back, face pale from exhaustion, or fear, or both. "Thank you for coming," she said. "No problem, ma'am. You said you lost a basement key?" She nodded. "It's gone. I've checked everywhere. I can't sleep knowing it's out there." He gave a small smile, trying to ease her nerves. "Happens more often than you'd think. Let's start with the main doors." She followed him as he worked, silent, except for the sound of her breathing behind him. He replaced the front lock, the back door, even the windows when she asked. When he reached the basement door, she hesitated before handing him the key ring. "This is the one that's missing?" he asked. She nodded again. "It was right there this morning. I keep all my keys on that hook. I noticed it gone after dark." He crouched, inspecting the old lock. It was heavier than the others, iron rather than brass, built to last. He ran a finger along the edge. "This is an antique. You sure you want it replaced?" "Yes," she said. "Destroy the old one, please." He didn't ask why. The work took nearly 2 hours. He melted the old keys and locks in his portable crucible as she watched from the doorway. She didn't flinch at the heat, only stared into the orange glow as though expecting to see something move inside it. When he finished, she paid in cash too much, even for an emergency job. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Now maybe I can rest." He nodded, packed his tools, and left. The whole way home, he could still feel the faint heat of the melted metal on his hands, a warmth that didn't fade even when the night air pressed in cold through the van's open window. Back at the shop, he emptied his pockets, set his keys on the counter, and locked the front door. He checked the furnace, still glowing faintly from earlier, and tossed a slag from the job into the flames, fragments of brass, steel, a twisted bit of melted iron that might once have been the basement lock. It hissed and sank out of sight. Then he noticed something odd. On his workbench, next to his own keyring, lay a single brass key. He frowned. He didn't remember putting it there. It was old, the metal worn smooth by years of use, the bow marked with a tiny stamped symbol, an ornate letter B surrounded by a circle. Basement. He turned it over in his hand. It was cold, colder than the rest of the metal in the room, as if it had been outside in the snow. He checked his tool bag, his coat, the floor. No other keys, no duplicates. He was sure he'd thrown them all into the furnace. He stood there for a long time, staring at it, until the ticking of the wall clock pulled him back. 3:47 a.m. "Tomorrow," he muttered to himself. "I'll call her tomorrow." He dropped the key into the drawer under the counter and went upstairs to the small apartment above the shop. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and restless. Each time he closed his eyes, he heard the soft metallic clink of a key turning in a lock somewhere below. When morning came, the noise stopped. He made coffee, sat at the desk by the window, and stared out at the pale sunlight melting over the street. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then his gaze fell on the workbench again. The drawer was open. The key was lying on the counter. He froze, cup halfway to his lips. The brass gleamed faintly, catching the light like an eye. He didn't remember leaving the drawer open. He set the cup down, walked to the counter, and picked up the key again. The B was clearer now, as though someone had polished it overnight. "Okay," he whispered. "That's enough." He dialed the woman's number from his invoice pad. It rang twice before she answered. "Hello? Mrs. Hayes? It's Jacob, the locksmith. I wanted to check if everything's all right this morning." A pause. "Everything's fine," she said. "Thank you again. He hesitated, feeling foolish. "About that missing key, have you found it?" "No," she said slowly. "But I realized something last night." "What's that?" "I didn't lose the basement key." He frowned. "But that's what you said." "I made a mistake," she said softly. "It was the bedroom key. I lost the key to my bedroom." He felt the air thicken. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "I found the basement key this morning. It was hanging right where it should have been. He stared at the brass key in his hand, the one he had found on his counter, the one with the B. "I see," he said quietly. "Thank you again for coming," she added, her voice distant now. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise." She hung up before he could answer. He stood there for a long time, the receiver pressed against his ear, listening to the faint static hum of the disconnected line. When he finally set it down, the shop felt smaller somehow, the air close and stale. He went to the furnace. The ashes were cold. He sifted through them with a pair of tongs, but found only gray dust. No trace of the melted locks. Back at the counter, the key was gone. He searched everywhere beneath papers, in drawers, even inside the trash bin, but it had vanished completely. He told himself he must have dropped it, that it had rolled somewhere out of sight. Yet when he sat down at the bench to catch his breath, something hard pressed against his palm. He looked down. The key was there, resting in his hand. He didn't remember picking it up. That night, he locked every door, checked each twice, and went to bed early. The wind had risen again, pushing against the windows like slow, deliberate hands. He dreamed of the furnace, of molten brass forming not into locks but into shapes that looked like eyes, opening and closing soundlessly in the fire. When he woke, the apartment was dark, though his alarm read 2:14 a.m. He lay still, trying to shake the dream, when a new sound broke through the quiet, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Metal on wood. Tap. Pause. Tap. He sat up slowly. The sound came from the shop below. He slipped out of bed, every movement deliberate, and crept down the stairs. The light from the street filtered weakly through the front windows, enough to see the outline of the workbench. The drawer was open again. Something gleamed inside. He reached for the light switch, but before he could touch it, the tapping stopped. The room went utterly still. Then, from behind him, a whisper so close it stirred the hair on his neck. "Jacob." He turned, heart hammering, but there was no one there. Only the key, lying on the counter where he had left it the night before, gleaming softly in the half-dark. And from somewhere deep in the walls, a sound like a lock turning. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, soft and pale, but it did nothing to make Jacob feel awake. He hadn't really slept after the whisper. He'd sat on the edge of his bed until dawn, staring at the brass key that now lay on the counter downstairs, unwilling to touch it but equally afraid to look away. He told himself he must have been dreaming. He'd been working too hard, taking too many late-night calls, breathing too much furnace smoke. Hallucinations weren't unheard of. But the sound of that voice still lived in the back of his throat, the way it had pronounced his name with calm certainty, as if the speaker were standing right behind him in the dark. When he finally went downstairs, the key was gone. That should have relieved him. It didn't. The counter was clear, the drawers all closed, and yet the faint impression of the key's outline remained in the dust, as though it had pressed itself into the wood like a brand. He checked every lock in the shop. The front door, the back door, even the padlocks on the tool cabinets. All secure. He ran his hands over them, listening for the familiar click and grind that was his trade's comfort. Nothing wrong, nothing missing, but his chest still felt tight, and every sound seemed amplified. The scrape of the broom, the creak of the stool, the low moan of the furnace. By late morning, he convinced himself to call Mrs. Hayes again. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, someone picked up, but no one spoke. Mrs. Hayes? Silence. Then, faintly, something that might have been breathing. "It's Jacob," he said. "The locksmith. We spoke last night. I just wanted to follow up." A click. The line went dead. He stared at the receiver. Then he called again. This time an automated voice answered. "The number you have dialed is not in service." He checked the invoice pad. He hadn't written the number wrong. It was there, clear and black in his own handwriting. He set the phone down and sat for a long time, watching the shadows of passing cars crawl across the walls. By afternoon, he'd convinced himself it was some kind of scam. A paranoid woman, a false address, a job that never really existed. Except for one thing. The money was still in his wallet. Heavy, too crisp, the bills all new. He took them out. Each was stamped faintly with something near the corner. A circle. Inside it, the same ornate letter B. He dropped the cash onto the counter and stepped back as if it might burn him. The room felt smaller again, the walls drawing closer, the air full of the metallic tang of brass. He looked toward the furnace. It was cold now, but even from here he could see something glinting inside. He hesitated, then opened the grate. Lying on the ash bed was the brass key, perfectly clean. Not a mark on it. He reached in with the tongs, but when the metal touched the key, he felt a sharp vibration, as if the thing had a pulse. He pulled back instinctively, the tongs clattering to the floor. When he looked again, the key was gone. He closed the furnace door and backed away slowly, the fine hairs on his arms standing on end. At noon, he locked up the shop and walked out into the city. He told himself he needed air, people, noise-proof, that the world still existed beyond the sound of metal. He walked past cafes, repair stores, children crossing streets, all perfectly ordinary. Yet everywhere he looked, keys seemed to glint. A janitor's belt clinking as he passed, a display of spare locks in a hardware shop window, even a child's toy shaped like an old skeleton key. Each one caught the light in a way that made his stomach twist. By evening, he'd wandered back to his shop without remembering how. The street was empty now, washed in amber light. His own front door was locked, just as he'd left it. But the moment he touched the handle, he knew something was wrong. The lock turned too easily, as though the key had already been used. He stepped inside. The shop was dim and still, nothing out of place, except for the faint smell of burned oil and a draft whispering through the seams of the floor. Then he noticed it. On the counter, a small folded note, his name written across the front, in a shaky hand. He opened it. Only 2 words inside, written in dark ink that looked almost wet. It fits. He dropped the note and turned, scanning the shop, his pulse climbing. Who's there? Nothing. Only the sound of the wind pressing against the door. He checked the locks again, front, back, the storage closet, all untouched. But when he reached the cellar door, the handle turned easily beneath his hand. He hadn't opened it in months. He never kept anything down there except old stock, empty boxes, the remnants of work that should have been discarded. He stood in front of it for a long time, listening. The house above his head was silent, but from below came a faint ticking, irregular, like the sound of a clock that had lost its rhythm. He told himself he wouldn't open it. He told himself to walk away. But the handle was already turning under his hand. The hinges groaned softly. Cool air rose from below, dry and stale, carrying the faint scent of metal filings and rust. He switched on the basement light. It flickered once, then steadied. At first glance, nothing was unusual. Rows of shelves, dusty equipment, a few locked cabinets. But the floor near the furnace was disturbed, the ash brushed aside as if someone had knelt there. He stepped closer. There, half buried in the dust, was the key. This time it wasn't clean. Its teeth were blackened, the metal rougher, pitted as if it had been exposed to fire for years instead of hours. And when he bent down to look closer, he saw that the B was gone. In its place, an engraving that hadn't been there before. J. He staggered back. The shelves seemed to shift, the air heavy with the scent of burned brass. He turned off the light and slammed the door, locking it, bolting it twice. He leaned against it, breath ragged, feeling the vibration through the wood like a heartbeat from the other side. When he finally climbed the stairs to his apartment, the world outside had gone completely dark. He poured himself a drink, something strong, and sat by the window. The glass shook slightly in his hand. He kept glancing at the door, expecting to hear the handle turn again, or the sound of metal scraping softly along the floor. But there was only the rain, beginning in light, hesitant drops. He stayed there for hours, until fatigue finally pulled him under. When he woke, it was still dark. The rain had stopped. For a moment, he thought he'd dreamed everything. Then he felt something cool and solid in his palm. The key. It lay there as though it had grown from his skin, pressed deep into his lifeline. The J gleamed faintly in the half-light. He dropped it instinctively, but it didn't hit the floor. It hung there in the air for a moment, suspended by something invisible, before falling soundlessly onto the rug. He stared at it, chest tight. The key was perfectly still, yet he could feel a faint pressure inside his head, a rhythm that didn't belong to him, like someone breathing through his lungs, counting with his heartbeat. He forced himself to stand, to pick up the phone, to call someone, anyone. The police, a friend, another locksmith. But when he lifted the receiver, there was no dial tone, only a slow, deliberate clicking on the line, like tumblers shifting in a lock. He lowered the phone, his pulse hammering. The key was gone again. The shop was silent. Then, from the basement, the faintest sound of metal turning against metal. Click. Pause. Click. He moved toward the cellar door, every step a fight against the growing sense that whatever was down there was not waiting for him, it was calling him. He reached the bottom of the stairs, hand trembling over the lock. It was his own work, his own craftsmanship, the product of precision and pride. He had made this door unbreakable, but now, as he watched, the bolt slid open from the inside. One slow, perfect motion. The door creaked. The light from the stairwell fell into the darkness below, where something glimmered. The key resting upright in the lock, teeth facing outward. For a moment, Jacob simply stared at it. Then, against every sane impulse, he reached out and touched it. It was warm this time, warm and pulsing faintly, like a living thing. And as he turned it, because of course he did, because that was what a locksmith does, the door opened wider. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and metal and something else, something breathing. By morning, the house no longer felt like his. Every sound seemed slightly out of sync, every hinge a fraction of a second late. Jacob moved through the rooms like a man trespassing in his own life, touching doorknobs, counting keys, checking latches that refused to stay where he left them. He hadn't gone down to the basement again after what he'd seen. He couldn't. The memory of that warm metal against his skin, the pulse that had throbbed through the brass, still lived beneath his fingernails. It wasn't fear that kept him away, it was recognition, the quiet certainty that the key was no longer just an object. It had become aware of him, the way an old tool remembers the hand that shaped it. When he opened the front door to leave for work, the lock didn't match. He stared at it, dumbfounded. The cylinder was newer, heavier, silver instead of brass, engraved faintly with a pattern he didn't recognize. He hadn't installed it. He hadn't even seen it before. For a moment he thought he might be losing his mind, that maybe he'd replaced it himself and forgotten. But when he reached for his ring of keys, none of them fit. Each one caught and slipped, useless, until the teeth had scraped thin white marks across the metal face of the lock. He tried the spare set, the master skeletons he kept for emergencies, nothing. Then, against reason, he tried the brass key. It slid in perfectly. The tumblers clicked once, twice, then turned with the slow, soft sigh of something satisfied. The door opened. He froze in the doorway, staring at the key still in the lock. It gleamed faintly, the engraved J, catching a stripe of light from the morning Sunday. He withdrew it carefully, holding it between thumb and forefinger, afraid to let it touch his palm. For a second, he thought he heard it whisper no words, just a tone, low and deliberate, like a voice humming through a vent. He dropped it into his pocket and stepped outside. The street was quiet. The air smelled of rain and metal, the kind of morning where everything felt slightly too sharp. He locked the door again, using the same key, and drove to the shop. The drive should have cleared his head, but as he passed familiar corners and streets, he began to notice the locks on every building. Deadbolts, gates, window latches, they all seemed newer than they should have been, as if the entire town had changed its hardware overnight. He even caught himself counting them at red lights, tracing patterns in his head, and realizing that more than half bore the same circular stamp as the bills in his wallet, the ornate letter B. At the shop, nothing had moved. The counter was clean, the furnace off, the air cold enough that his breath clouded when he exhaled. He unlocked the front door with his regular key, but as soon as he stepped inside, the door closed behind him with a sound too heavy to belong to wood. The bolt slid home on its own. He turned, heart pounding, and saw that the lock had changed there too. Not the silver one from home. Not the brass he'd used before, something darker, almost black. The metal rippled as though it were still soft from the forge. He didn't remember forging anything that color. He tested it. The key in his pocket turned easily, smooth as water. The sound it made was too intimate, a quiet gasp in the silence. He pulled it out quickly, dropped it onto the counter, and stepped back as if it had teeth. For the rest of the day, he tried to distract himself with work, but every job he took felt wrong. The sound of the metal under his tools made him flinch. The smell of cut steel burned in his throat. Customers came and went, leaving faint fingerprints on the counter, but their voices seemed far away, muffled by something invisible. At one point, he caught himself whispering under his breath as he filed a key blank, counting not the ridges but something else, the pauses between them, as though repeating a phrase he didn't remember learning. When the last customer left and the sky went dark, he locked up, double bolting every door. He made sure to use his own keys, not the brass one, but the moment he turned away, he heard the faint, deliberate sound of another lock engaging somewhere deeper inside the shop. Then another. One by one, a chain of clicks spreading through the walls. He froze, listening. The sound moved slowly, methodically, as if something behind the walls was sealing the building from within. He reached for the light switch, but the lights flickered once and went out. The shop sank into darkness, the kind so complete it made distance meaningless. He waited for his eyes to adjust, his breathing shallow. Somewhere close, a few feet away, at most metal scraped softly against wood. The smell of hot brass returned, faint but distinct. He took a cautious step forward, his hand brushing against the counter, the tool still laid out from earlier. Something cool brushed his fingers. He jerked back and realized it was the brass key. He hadn't touched it since morning, but now it was warm again, almost feverish. It pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat. Against every instinct, he closed his hand around it. The heat spread instantly up his arm, a slow, creeping warmth that numbed the skin and filled his head with a low, ringing hum. And then the locks began to open. He heard them clearly this time, each one distinct, each click perfectly spaced. Front door, back door, storage room, cellar. The sequence moved like breath, steady and certain. He knew the rhythm. It was the pattern he'd made himself, the one he used to test the precision of a new key. Only this wasn't a test. This was something answering. He staggered toward the back room, but the door was already ajar. The air beyond it shimmered faintly, thick with heat, though the furnace wasn't lit. He reached out and pushed the door open fully. The workshop was gone. In its place stretched a corridor lined with doors, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching into the dark, each fitted with a different lock. The air smelled of oil and ash. He recognized some of his own designs among them. Old models he hadn't made in years, prototypes he'd abandoned, even locks from customers' homes, identical down to the scratches and marks, and on every one, the faint imprint of that circular symbol. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on metal rather than wood. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door behind him closed with a soft thud. He turned, but there was no handle on this side. The locks nearest him began to rattle, just slightly at first, then more insistently, like someone testing them from the other side. He moved down the corridor, unable to stop himself, his hand trailing along the cold brass as he passed. Each door vibrated faintly at his touch, humming in the same rhythm as the key in his pocket. The humming grew louder the farther he went, until it filled his head, a chorus of tumblers turning just out of sight. Then, at the end of the corridor, he saw a single door unlike the rest. Larger, darker, its lock made not of metal but something that looked like bone, pale and smooth and faintly translucent. The keyhole was wide, waiting. He knew without being told that this was what the brass key had been made for. He pulled it from his pocket. It gleamed dully in the dim light, the engraved J pulsing once, in time with the blood in his temples. He should have run. He should have thrown it into the dark and closed his eyes, but his hands moved of their own accord. The key slid into the bone lock, and the sound it made was not mechanical, it was wet, like a sigh drawn from deep within the earth. The door opened inward, revealing only darkness. He stepped through, and he was back in his shop. Everything looked normal again, the counter, the tools, the furnace still cold. The brass key lay in his hand, inert. The corridor was gone. For a moment he thought he'd imagined it all. Then he looked toward the walls. Every door in the shop now had a lock. The cabinets, the storage closets, even the windows. Each one gleamed faintly, new and unfamiliar, fitted perfectly where there had been none before. He tried them. None opened. Only the key in his hand turned them, one by one, each yielding to him with that same sighing sound. But with every door he unlocked, something in him seemed to drain, as though a part of him was being left behind with each turn of the key. His reflection in the dark glass of the window grew paler, the lines of his face softer, indistinct. His heartbeat slowed, matching the rhythm of the locks. He forced himself to stop after the last door, gasping, his hand trembling around the key. He stumbled to the window. Outside, the street was gone. In its place stretched rows of doors, endless and shifting, each one marked with the same circular emblem. He turned back toward the shop, but the walls were changing again, the surface rippling like molten metal. Locks sprouted from every surface desk, drawers, toolboxes, even the floorboards. He heard them turning, opening and closing, a mechanical whisper that built into a rhythm too steady to be random. It was breathing. The realization hit him like a blow. The house wasn't just changing, it was alive, exhaling through the locks, inhaling through the keyholes, and he was inside its lungs. He dropped the key. It hit the floor and rang once, clear and high. Instantly the lock stopped moving. The air froze. He stood there, waiting, every muscle locked. Then, slowly, the nearest lock turned by itself. One click, then another, and another. It was no longer waiting for him to use the key. He backed away toward the stairs, every step careful, trying not to make a sound. But the locks followed him, one door after another swinging open behind him, the air stirring as something unseen moved closer. He reached the top of the stairs, his breath shallow, and slammed his apartment door shut. He locked it, bolted it, shoved a chair under the handle. For a few moments, nothing. Silence. Then, faintly, from the other side of the door, a voice. Calm, deliberate. "Jacob," it whispered. "You make beautiful locks." He pressed his back against the wall, eyes wide. The voice continued, closer now. "But you never understood. Every lock needs a key, and every key needs a door." He felt a vibration against his foot and looked down. The brass key had rolled up the stairs. It stopped against his shoe, the engraved J glinting in the dim light. He didn't touch it, but he could feel the warmth through the floorboards spreading slowly upward, reaching for the hand that had forged it. And from the door came one last soft click, the sound of a bolt sliding free from the inside. Jacob didn't sleep that night, though sleep kept trying to drag him under in fits and starts. Each time his eyes closed, he saw the locks breathing again, expanding, contracting, their keyholes widening like pupils in the dark. The walls seemed to pulse faintly with the rhythm of it, as if the house were counting time in its own way, and the air in his lungs belonged to something else. He sat on the floor with his back against the far wall of the bedroom, knees pulled close, staring at the brass key on the rug. It hadn't moved since it stopped against his shoe, but its surface had changed. It no longer gleamed, it absorbed light, drinking it in, its edges soft and blurred like something half submerged. He could still see the engraved J faintly at the center, but around it, faint lines had begun to branch outward, delicate as veins. By dawn, he decided he had to leave. He told himself it didn't matter where he went, anywhere but here. He would drive until he ran out of road, abandon the house, the shop, the furnace, everything. He packed a small bag with clothes, tools, his wallet, and avoided looking at the key. When he opened the front door, the morning light hit him like a shock. For a moment he thought it was over, but then he saw the street. The houses were all wrong. Each one sat exactly where it should, but their windows were black, their doors shut tight, every one bearing a lock that hadn't been there before. Even the lampposts had keyholes at their bases. He looked left and right and realized that there were no cars, no people, no sound of birds or engines. The air was heavy and still, and everything smelled faintly of scorched metal. He turned back toward his house. The door was closed. He hadn't closed it. He reached for the handle and froze. The lock had changed again. It was no longer the smooth silver cylinder or the blackened ripple metal from before. Now it was something organic, a pale ring of bone-like material with a keyhole too deep, too dark. The edges of it seemed to twitch slightly, like the muscle of an eyelid struggling not to blink. He stepped back, his stomach tightening. For a moment, he considered running to a neighbor's door, but when he looked, he saw them all watching him, rows of identical locks glinting in the light. He turned to the street and began to walk. His footsteps echoed unnaturally loud against the pavement. He didn't make it far. At the corner, he found another door standing by itself, unconnected to any wall. Its frame half sunk into the road like a tombstone. It had a single brass keyhole at its center, the edges marked with the same circular symbol that had followed him since that night. He stopped, chest tight, realizing that no matter which direction he turned, the world offered only doors. The wind rose, carrying with it a low metallic hum that seemed to come from beneath the asphalt. He took a step back, and the ground shifted under his feet. The hum grew louder. He turned and ran. He didn't know where he was going. The street stretched on, turning in on itself, folding until he recognized the corner he'd started from. His house waited there, identical, unchanged, except for one detail. The front door now stood wide open. The hall inside was dark. He told himself not to go in. He should have turned around, broken a window, anything. But the air behind him was colder now, and every instinct screamed that whatever waited outside was worse. He stepped through the threshold. The door closed behind him. The house was silent. He could hear only his own breath, quick and shallow. The smell of hot metal lingered faintly, mixed with something wet and earthy. He looked down the hallway. The walls were smooth, almost featureless. All the locks he had seen before, the doors, the bolts, the handles, were gone. There was only one now, far at the end of the corridor. A single, enormous keyhole glimmered faintly, the air around it shifting as if in heat. He felt drawn to it. His legs moved before his mind could stop them. The closer he came, the louder the sound grew. Not quite a hum anymore, but a whisper. Thousands of tiny voices overlapping, speaking the same phrase in endless repetition. Open it. Open it. Open it. The words grew clearer with each step, echoing inside his skull. When he reached the end of the hall, the keyhole filled the door like an eye. Its edges pulsed faintly, wet with condensation. The air was thick and warm. He stood there, frozen. The brass key in his pocket began to move. It pressed against the fabric like a heartbeat, striking in rhythm with the whispering around him. He tried to back away, but his body refused. His hand went to his pocket almost of its own accord. The key was burning hot now, but it didn't hurt. The heat felt familiar, like the warmth of the furnace, the glow of his craft. He drew it out slowly. It gleamed faintly, its veins pulsing in time with the door. He knew absolutely that this was what it wanted, that this was what all of it had been leading to. The missing key, the false job, the locks that replaced themselves. The thing in the furnace hadn't been metal at all. It had been waiting to be forged into this. He raised the key. The door sighed. "Jacob," said a voice from the other side. It was calm, quiet, intimate, the same voice that had whispered his name in the dark. "You made me. You can open me." He shook his head, whispering, "No." "Well, you've already begun," it said. "Every lock you ever made was a rehearsal. Every door a rehearsal. You think you shape metal, but you were only carving mirrors. For me, he wanted to run, but the space behind him was gone. The hall had vanished. Only the door remained, stretching upward into darkness. His reflection wavered faintly in the surface of the keyhole, too large, too thin, eyes black as the space beyond. The voice softened. Don't be afraid. You've done this your whole life. You make things that fit. His hand trembled. What happens if I open it? You'll understand why you were made. He took a step closer. The air vibrated against his skin, warm and electric. He could hear the locks inside the walls turning again, one after another, as though the entire house were preparing itself. The whispers grew clearer, closer, until they became his own voice, repeating the same phrase under his breath. Every key needs a door. Every door needs a key. He raised the brass key, and for a moment, everything went quiet. Then he inserted it. The fit was perfect. The tumblers inside shifted with a sound that wasn't mechanical at all. It was organic, wet like cartilage sliding against bone. The air grew heavy, pressing against his chest, and the key began to turn on its own. He felt it pulling at his arm, his shoulder, his spine, as though the motion were unwinding him. The metal in his hand softened, spreading like liquid fire. It crawled up his wrist, his forearm, the warmth seeping into his veins. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the door. Good, the voice whispered. Now finish it. He turned the key the rest of the way. The door opened not outward, not inward, but in every direction at once. The walls folded, the ceiling split apart, the air filled with a low, resonant sound that wasn't quite a scream. He staggered back, shielding his eyes, but the light that poured out wasn't light at all. It was shape geometry unraveling, angles bending, locks breaking open to reveal smaller locks within, spinning endlessly. And then, through it all, he saw something move. A hand, pale and thin, reaching from the darkness, its fingers long and jointed wrong. It touched the edge of the keyhole, and the entire room seemed to sigh in relief. The voice spoke again, softer now, almost grateful. Now we are open. The hand withdrew. The light or whatever passed for it faded. The door stood ajar, its interior black and depthless. The key, now fused to his hand, pulsed once more before cooling. The metal had become part of him, spreading in fine lines beneath the skin, tracing his veins in gold. He tried to pull it free, but it wouldn't move. He staggered backward until he hit the wall. The whispering had stopped. The only sound was his own breath, shallow and uneven. The door did not close. He waited, expecting something to emerge, but nothing came. After a while, he began to think maybe nothing would. Maybe the thing beyond the door had already entered him. He looked at his reflection in the polished brass plate beside the doorway. His face was pale, eyes hollow, but his pupils gleamed faintly gold, like keyholes catching the light. A slow understanding settled in his chest. The locks in the walls, the shifting metal, the voice it hadn't been trying to escape. It had been trying to make a way in, and now the way was made. He turned toward the door again. The darkness beyond it seemed to breathe. His hand rose, almost of its own accord, and rested against the frame. The metal in his skin hummed faintly. Jacob, the voice said one last time, from everywhere and nowhere. He looked down. His reflection smiled, even though he hadn't. He stepped forward. The door closed without a sound. They found the house 3 days later, after the neighbors complained about the smell of burning metal. The police arrived first, then the fire department, and finally a locksmith. Not Jacob, of course, but someone he'd trained years ago. A young man named Daniel, who still remembered the old ways of filing and pinning by hand. He had always admired Jacob's work. There was something precise about it, a kind of devotion that bordered on obsession. The front door was locked when they arrived. It was a simple lock. No scorch marks, no broken frame. But when Daniel bent to examine it, he realized it wasn't any model he'd ever seen before. The keyway was too narrow, shaped in a spiral that seemed to fold inward rather than out. He tried his picks, his skeleton keys, even a drill, but the metal resisted everything. It was softer than steel, yet somehow unbreakable, as if it absorbed pressure instead of yielding to it. Inside, through the windows, they could see nothing. The glass had been coated from within by a thin layer of soot or ash. The air that seeped out through the keyhole was warm, metallic, and faintly sweet, like copper left to rot. Eventually, they forced their way in by prying open a side window. The moment Daniel stepped inside, his tools jingled faintly on his belt, as though something unseen had brushed against them. The house was quiet. No sign of struggle, no sign of life. The furniture was covered in a fine dust that sparkled faintly in the light. Even the walls seemed to hum, low and steady, like a machine still running long after it should have stopped. In the living room, every door had a new lock, not just the bedroom or basement. Every door, every cabinet, every drawer, even the seams of the floorboards. They gleamed faintly, all identical, each engraved with the same small circular symbol, a letter B enclosed within a ring. Daniel knelt to study one of them. The workmanship was flawless. No seams, no screws, no indication of how the mechanism had been fitted. It was as if the metal had grown directly out of the wood. Was he working on something new? One of the officers asked. Daniel shook his head. Jacob was traditional, brass and steel. He didn't do whatever this is. They moved through the house slowly, room by room. The further they went, the stranger it became. The air grew thicker, almost oily. The locks seemed to pulse faintly when light struck them, as though reacting to movement. Downstairs, the basement door was sealed shut. No handle, no bolt, just a single keyhole, perfectly round and black as glass. Daniel crouched before it, trying to steady his breath. Something about that door filled him with a dread he couldn't explain. It wasn't the heat or the smell, it was the way the door seemed aware of him. The faint vibration he could feel through his fingertips when he touched it. He took out his pick set and selected the thinnest hook he owned. It slid in easily, but there were no pins to feel, no tumblers, no resistance at all. It was like probing into empty space. He drew his hand back quickly. The pick was warm. The tip had blackened slightly, as if singed by invisible flame. One of the officers called from upstairs, and Daniel straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. In the workshop, they found the furnace. Cold now, but the inside walls were lined with something that shimmered faintly when the light hit it. Melted metal, fused into patterns that looked disturbingly organic: veins, arteries, the branching of nerves. Among the ash and slag lay fragments of old locks, warped into shapes that made no mechanical sense. On the workbench, beneath a layer of dust, they found Jacob's ledger. The pages were covered in his tight, slanted handwriting lists of clients, codes, sketches. But near the end, the writing changed. The last few pages were filled with circles, spirals, and a repeated phrase scrawled over and over until the ink tore through the paper. Every key needs a door. Every door needs a key. The final page contained only a single drawing, a key unlike any Daniel had ever seen, its bow shaped like an eye. Beneath it, in shaky script, 3 words: the last lock. They kept searching. The bedroom was empty except for an overturned chair and a cracked mirror. The bathroom walls were lined with tiny hairline scratches, hundreds of them, all vertical, as if someone had been carving with a nail or blade. Each mark ended at the same height, exactly 5 feet from the floor. But it was the basement that drew them back. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting behind that door. It wasn't curiosity, not exactly. It was the quiet, compulsive need of his trade. No locksmith could stand before a locked door forever. It went against the nature of the craft. That night, after the others left, he returned. He told himself it was for documentation, for the police report. But the truth was simpler. He couldn't stop thinking about that keyhole. He worked in silence. The house seemed even more still than before, as though holding its breath. He brought specialized tools this time: an endoscope, a portable torch, acid for corroding steel. But when he looked into the keyhole with the lens, the image made no sense. The inside of the lock was vast, far deeper than it could have been physically. a tunnel of gleaming metal that went on without end. And near the bottom, for just a second, he thought he saw movement, a reflection, something looking back. He pulled away, heart pounding. The image on the scope continued to flicker, though he wasn't touching it. Then the screen went dark. He sat there for a long time, the quiet pressing against his skull. Finally, he reached into his bag and took out one of Jacob's old keys, a blank he'd kept as a keepsake, forged years ago by his mentor's hand. The brass was dull and worn, but something about the weight felt right. He held it up to the door. The fit was perfect. He hesitated only once, just long enough to whisper to himself, "For you, old man." Then he turned the key. The sound it made was not a click, but a sigh, a long, low exhale that rolled through the house like distant thunder. The air changed, suddenly hot and wet, and the lights flickered out. He smelled brass, burned brass, sharp and sweet. The door swung open on its own. The basement beyond was filled with light, a dim, molten glow that shimmered like the inside of a forge. Daniel stepped forward, unable to help himself. The walls pulsed faintly, their surfaces rippling with embedded metal veins that shone with a dull, organic warmth. The floor was covered in shallow indentations, the shapes of footprints pressed into soft metal. At the center of the room stood something that might once have been human. It was made of brass, not sculpted, but grown, the metal forming around the suggestion of bone and muscle, the surface smooth and pale gold. The face was unfinished, the features soft and vague, but the mouth was open, and in its outstretched hand lay a single key, Jacob's key, the one Daniel had seen in the drawings. He reached out without meaning to. The air hummed. The key gleamed once in the half-light, and he saw that it wasn't engraved with a letter this time. Instead, his own name had been etched into the bow, Daniel. He took it. The moment his fingers closed around the metal, a warmth spread up his arm, not painful, but dense, heavy, intimate. The brass figure before him seemed to relax, its posture softening, as though relieved. And then, slowly, it began to crumble. The surface flaked away like ash, collapsing inward, revealing hollow space. The dust glowed faintly, swirling in the air. Daniel staggered back, clutching the key. The door behind him slammed shut. He turned, tried the handle. Locked. The hum grew louder, deep and rhythmic, vibrating through the floor. The walls brightened, the veins of metal glowing molten red. The key in his hand pulsed in time with the sound, and before he could stop himself, he lifted it toward the door. The fit was exact, impossibly smooth. He hesitated, trembling. From behind him, a voice spoke softly. "Every key needs a door." He spun around. No one, just the empty brass shell, already melting into the floor. Then the voice came again, closer, almost within him. "Every door needs a key." He turned the key. The door opened. When the police returned the next morning, the house was sealed again. Every window, every vent, every door welded, shut from the inside. The air was still, faintly metallic. They never found Daniel. The report described the scene as structurally impossible. They sealed the property, boarded the windows, condemned it. But a week later, another locksmith came, a subcontractor hired by the city to change the locks before demolition. He found the front door unlocked. Inside, everything was quiet. The air was cool and clean, no smell of ash or heat. The walls were bare, the rooms empty except for one thing. A single brass figure standing in the center of the living room, hand outstretched. In its palm lay a key. The locksmith approached, frowning. He picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hand. It was engraved with a single letter. J. He pocketed it absently, thinking he'd keep it as a curiosity. When he reached the front door to leave, he found it locked behind him. He tried his picks, his spare tools, even his hammer. Nothing worked. Then he remembered the key. He slid it into the lock. It turned perfectly. The door opened. He stepped outside, into the sunlight, and for a moment, Everything seemed normal. Then he noticed the faint shimmer beneath his skin, like fine lines of metal running up his wrist. He touched them absently, shrugged, and walked to his van. Behind him, the door closed on its own. The lock clicked once. Then faintly from inside the house came a whisper. "Now we are open." Story 6. The Last Breath. They said Vatnheim Hollow had been asleep for centuries, a cathedral of blue ice and volcanic stone buried under the northern cap, older than any language that named it. But Clara Hensley had never believed in sleep, not in the way the earth did it. To her, the world didn't rest. It only held its breath. The descent began at dawn, though you could never tell the hour beneath that endless sky of white. The wind howled across the glacier's edge, bending the antenna of the base station and filling every pause with its low, animal hum. Clara's breath condensed in front of her, small bursts of mist that vanished almost instantly. The rope coiled beside her boots. She tightened the straps of her harness, checked her oxygen gauge, then lowered herself into the mouth of the glacier. The entrance was narrow, carved into a slit of cobalt ice that reflected her headlamp like water. The world above shrank quickly to a circle of pale light, until it disappeared completely, leaving only the sound of her own breathing and the rhythmic squeak of rope sliding through the belay. 40 meters down, she reached the first shelf, a ledge of obsidian-veined basalt, half swallowed by the ice. The air here was still, thick with mineral dust and the faint scent of frozen sulfur. She crouched, steadying her breath. The walls pulsed faintly under the lamp's glow, veins of trapped air flickering like buried lightning. "Base, this is Clara," she said into her radio, her voice muffled by static. "I've reached Chamber A air pressure stable, proceeding deeper." A hiss answered her. Then nothing. She tapped the transmitter against her glove. No response. It wasn't unusual, the layers of ice distorted signal like mirrors bending light. She left it on anyway. Sometimes the sound of static was easier to bear than silence. The next passage narrowed to a crawl space. She slid through on her stomach, the ridged surface of the ice pressing cold against her ribs. Her lamp beam caught a swirl of ancient frost, thin as smoke, clinging to the tunnel walls. Beneath it, faint markings lines carved in the ice itself, spiraling patterns that might have been mineral fractures, or something else. When she reached the next chamber, she rose to her knees and exhaled slowly. The air was colder here, sharp and dry. The cavern ceiling arched above her like the inside of a lung, smooth, pale blue, translucent, in places where the ice thinned to light. She checked her gauge. 2,000 psi. Plenty. The plan was simple. Collect carbon samples from the basalt layers beneath the ice sheet, log the mineral patterns, return to base before nightfall. But as she set up her equipment, the wind above shifted. The sound reached her faintly, like a sigh moving through the glacier. Then came the first tremor. It was subtle at first, a deep groan that rolled through the stone beneath her knees. She froze, looking up. A few crystals of ice broke loose from the ceiling and drifted down, catching the light like falling stars. Then the floor lurched. "Base, this is Clara. I'm reading a..." The rest of the sentence vanished in the roar that followed. The ground split somewhere behind her, a blast of cold air sweeping through the chamber. She reached for the rope, but it jerked violently, snapping taut before going slack. The light above her flickered, then went out. When the noise stopped, she was on her side in the dark, her helmet half cracked, her lamp hanging uselessly from its strap. Her right leg throbbed, pinned beneath a slab of ice. She pushed, but it didn't move. Her breath came fast. She forced herself to slow it. In for 4. Hold. Out for 6. The old diver's rhythm. Panic burned oxygen faster than anything else. She switched to her backup lamp, weaker, but enough to see. The rope above was buried beneath several meters of compacted ice. There would be no climbing out. She checked her radio. The light blinked, but no sound came through. "Base, this is Clara. Do you copy? I've had a partial collapse. Entrance sealed. I'm in Chamber B." Static. Then silence. Her gauge. Red. 1,950 pounds per square inches. She had time. She took stock. Pack intact. Water bottle, nutrient gel, small hammer, chisel, notebook. The basics. She began chiseling away at the edge of the slab, pinning her leg. The sound of metal striking ice echoed endlessly, swallowed and returned from all directions. She couldn't tell where the walls ended. Hours passed, or minutes. It was impossible to tell. When the slab finally shifted, she pulled her leg free and lay back, exhausted. The ice beneath her hummed faintly, as though still remembering the collapse. She closed her eyes and listened. Beneath the hum, she could hear another sound, softer, rhythmic, steady as breath. It wasn't her. She held her breath to be sure. The sound continued. A low, slow exhalation, rising from deep within the ice. When she opened her eyes, her breath fogged the air, but the fog didn't disperse. It hung there, suspended, moving slowly toward the opposite wall as if drawn by something unseen. Her chest tightened. She reached for her radio again. Bass. "Do you read me?" The static hissed, then broke apart, reforming into something almost like a voice. "Yeah." "Say again." "Don't breathe." She froze. The signal cut. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She checked her gauge again. 1,850 pounds per square inches. She focused on the number, the tangibility of it. Oxygen meant survival. Numbers meant order. She decided to stay put until the tremor subsided. She marked the time the old way, scratching a line into the ice beside her with the tip of her chisel. Day 1. The motion steadied her. She ate a small piece of gel, drank a mouthful of water. The air was cold enough that her breath crystallized on the inside of her mask. She wiped it clear and leaned back. The hum continued. When she finally drifted to sleep, it wasn't restful. She dreamed she was floating in water, the surface above her a ceiling of ice, her own reflection staring down through it. Each time she tried to surface, the image met her halfway, open-mouthed, stealing her air. She woke gasping. Her lamp flickered weakly, its battery low. Her tank read 1,700 pounds per square inches. She couldn't tell if it was morning or night. She scraped another line into the ice. Day 2. Her throat ached when she spoke into the radio again. Still here. No movement above. Air stable. Her voice echoed strangely this time, delayed as if someone else were repeating it from another part of the cave. Still here. She turned sharply, lamp beam slicing the dark. The sound stopped. Only the drip of water remained. The walls looked different now. The ice wasn't as clear. Streaks of gray had formed beneath the surface, curling like veins. She touched one and felt a faint vibration, almost like a pulse. She pressed her ear to the wall. Beneath the cold, she heard it again, the breathing, slow, immense, patient. The cave was exhaling. Her own breathing grew shallow in response, as if matching it. For a moment, she felt something tighten in her chest, a pull in the rhythm, like her lungs were sinking with it. She forced herself to look away. "Don't," she whispered aloud. Her voice came out hoarse. "Don't lose the rhythm." And she marked another line. Day 3. She tried to count her breaths, but somewhere between 1 and 200 she lost the thread. Her vision swam. Her pulse slowed. She thought she heard movement again, soft scraping, like fingers tracing the inside of the ice. She turned and saw faint shapes in the walls, outlines that almost looked like hands pressed against glass. Her lamp flickered. She whispered to herself, "They're just fractures, just stress fractures." But the hands moved. Very slowly, they moved. She stumbled backward, tripping over her pack, her chisel clattering against the floor. When she looked again, the walls were still. The marks had not changed, but she couldn't shake the image of them. Reaching, Herrgaugerit 1, 500 Psi. She began carving again, rough lines in the ice, not just counting days, but keeping herself tethered. Each mark was a breath, a reminder that she still existed in time. 4, 5, 6. The radio crackled faintly beside her. "Clara?" A voice said clear, calm, impossibly close. She froze. Who is this? Static. Then, softer. You're almost out. She stared at the radio. Out of air? Out of hours. Then silence. She pressed the transmit button until her glove squealed against the plastic, but no reply came. Her hand was trembling. She made another mark in the wall. The chisel slipped, leaving a jagged, branching crack instead of a straight line. She leaned closer and realized the fracture was spreading on its own, growing deeper, the surface spidering outward with a faint sound, like breathing through teeth. She stepped back, light trembling in her hand. The crack widened, revealing a thin line of darker ice beneath almost black, shot through with threads of red. She didn't know how long she stood there staring at it. Time stretched, bent, folded. Her breaths grew slower. The hum in the walls matched her pulse exactly now. She reached out and touched the crack. It was warm, then the ice exhaled. At first, Clara told herself that the counting was to keep her sane. It gave her something to do, something to hold on to while the minutes lost their shape and folded in on themselves like ice under pressure. But by the end of what she thought might have been the second day, the counting had stopped being hers. It was as though the cave itself had taken over, whispering the numbers back to her in the soft, steady rhythm of its own pulse. She would whisper 1, and the echo would return a half-second later, 1 softer, deeper, stretched through the ice. Sometimes it sounded like her own voice. Other times, like something older, shaped by the air itself. When she awoke from the first sleep she could remember, her body was stiff, her throat raw. The lamp beside her was still faintly glowing, but the battery indicator flashed red. Her oxygen gauge read 1,200 pounds per square inches. She frowned at it, not sure if that meant 6 hours or 12. The needle twitched faintly, like something breathing beneath the glass. She drank from her bottle, but the water tasted wrong metallic, like melted snow that had passed through blood. She forced herself to swallow, then opened her notebook. The last thing she remembered writing was a single line. Day 3 still stable. The ice moves when I breathe, but now there were more entries beneath it. Written in the same cramped, left-slanted handwriting she recognized as her own. Day 4. Time isn't counting properly. Day 5. I tried sleeping, but I woke up older. Day 6. The air is different. The sound inside it feels full. Day 7. The sound is counting. She stared at the words for a long time before closing the notebook, pressing her thumb against its cover as if to stop them from multiplying. Her radio hissed softly beside her. She leaned toward it, half expecting the voice again, but there was only the low hum of interference. It sounded almost like breath steady, mechanical, unending. She switched it off. The silence that followed was worse. She took the chisel from her pack and dragged it slowly across the wall beside her. The ice squealed, leaving a thin white line that caught the reflection of her lamp. She made another, then another, each one a mark to anchor her to the present. But after the 6th, she paused, realizing the first had already faded, melted smooth, as if the wall had swallowed it. She reached out, touched the surface. It was warm again. A soft vibration traveled through her fingertips, and she felt the rhythm pulse up her arm. Slow, deliberate, patient. The cave was breathing beneath her touch. She whispered, "I'm not imagining this, am I?" Her voice echoed back, distorted, layered. "Not imagining this." She dropped her hand, stumbling backward until she hit the opposite wall. Her lamp flickered once, then steadied. The air shimmered faintly, as if the space between her and the wall had thickened. She could hear the faintest of sounds, a slow rasping, like someone dragging their hand through sand, carving invisible lines into the ice. She turned in a circle, pressing her back to the stone, trying to locate the sound. It was everywhere. When she breathed in, the sound inhaled with her. When she exhaled, it did too. She wanted to scream, but the air was too thin. Instead, she whispered, "Count." She made another mark on the wall. 7, then another. 8. The marks calmed her for a while. Each cut in the ice was proof that time was still moving, that she was still part of it. But after a while, the numbers stopped meaning anything. The air grew heavier, the walls closer. Her breathing filled the chamber like the ticking of a clock too large to silence. She checked her oxygen again. 900 pounds per square inches. But the gauge hand seemed slower, almost sluggish, as though caught in syrup. She tapped it. It didn't move. That was when she realized she could hear her own heart through the ice. It wasn't in her chest anymore. It was in the walls. Each beat came back to her, delayed and multiplied, echoing down the invisible tunnels beyond her reach. Thump, thump, thump. Each one felt farther away than the last. She crouched by the notebook again, hands shaking. She wrote quickly, the pencil slipping in her gloves. Day 8. I can't tell if the heart I hear is mine. The radio crackled. She froze, staring at it. Then, through the static, a voice. Clara. Her breath hitched. Yeah. No answer. Only a slow exhale that filled the chamber. Neil, if you can hear me, I'm alive. The tunnel collapsed, but I'm fine. I just need you to tell me how long it's been. The radio clicked, and the voice came again, but softer, fragmented. Not long. 2 minutes. Her vision swam. No, that can't be right. 2 minutes, it repeated, more insistent. We're digging. Don't sleep. She looked down at her hand. The pencil was gone. In its place, the chisel, the tip red with rust. But there was no rust here. Only ice. She turned to the wall again. Her breath caught. Where there had been 8 marks, there were now dozens. Long scratches covering every inch of the chamber. Some so deep the blue of the ice turned black. She moved closer, shining her light along them. Beneath the marks were faint shapes, grooves worn into the stone by repetition, the same motion over and over, hundreds of times. Her glove brushed the surface. It was smooth, as if each mark had been made not by chisel or tool, but by hand. She whispered, "Who did this?" The echo answered, "You did this." Her chest constricted. She pressed her fingers against one of the deeper lines, tracing it. The wall vibrated faintly under her touch. The shape wasn't random. It curved, spiraled inward, a pattern she'd seen before in the first chamber, when she'd entered the cave. It wasn't a mark. It was a map. The spiral tightened as it descended, each loop marked with smaller grooves like tally marks. She counted them. 10, 20, 50. Then she stopped. The pattern repeated again and again, each smaller than the last, until it disappeared into a single pinprick hole deep in the ice. The cave was marking itself. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on her gear. Her tank hissed softly as it shifted, the regulator clinking against the stone. The sound echoed and didn't stop. It kept repeating, delayed, overlapping, until it became a rhythm, the same rhythm as her breath. She turned the valve slightly. The hiss grew louder, sharper, like an exhale too long held back. The lamp flickered again. The radio crackled. Clara. She didn't answer. Breathe with me. The voice wasn't Neil's anymore. It was her own. Her pulse thundered in her throat. She clutched the radio, whispered, "Where are you?" The answer came immediately. "Behind you." Ugh. She spun around, the lamp beam shaking violently. The wall behind her shimmered, faint reflections dancing across its surface. For a second, she thought she saw a face there, her own, pale and distorted, eyes wide, lips moving. The reflection was delayed by half a breath. When she inhaled, it exhaled. When she exhaled, it smiled. She stumbled away, slipping on the frozen floor. The reflection followed her, rippling in every wall now, 1,000 versions of her breathing out of sync. Her hand brushed the notebook again. She flipped it open, desperate to anchor herself in something written, something real. The pages were filled from end to end. Each one carried the same sentence, repeated in her handwriting, smaller and smaller until it became unreadable. The count doesn't stop when you stop. She felt a faint tremor through the soles of her boots. The hum was growing again, deeper this time, so deep she could feel it in her teeth. The air thickened, heavy with vibration. The walls flexed inward with each breath, the space shrinking around her. Her tank hissed softly, leaking from the valve she hadn't tightened. She tried to twist it shut, but her hands were shaking too much. The hiss grew louder, became a scream in her ears. Then, suddenly, silence. The air was still. Hair lamp dimmed. She reached for the wall, needing to touch something solid. Her glove met warmth. Human warmth. Skin. She yanked her hand back and stared. There, beneath the layer of translucent ice, was a hand pressed flat against the other side of the wall. Pale, motionless, fingers splayed. The reflection stared back at her again. Closer now, eyes level with hers. She whispered, "How long?" It mouthed the same words, but slower. She slammed her palm against the ice. The echo struck back from the inside. Her own voice, faint, from nowhere and everywhere at once, whispered, "Long enough." Then the wall exhaled. Her mask filled with frost. The oxygen gauge dropped to 0. She couldn't breathe. But when she fell to her knees, her lungs still moved. The rhythm continued, steady, precise, borrowed. The cave was breathing for her now. Clara no longer remembered what silence used to feel like. The cave had turned her breath into a language, and the air itself whispered back with every movement she made. When she opened her eyes again, if again still meant anything, the walls no longer looked blue. They had gone clear, as though the glacier had melted just enough to reveal what had always been inside it. Faces. Not distinct, not complete, but hints of them. Cheekbones caught in the light. The impression of lips. The suggestion of eyes that blinked when her lamp shifted. She tried to convince herself it was reflection, the way smooth ice sometimes threw back a distorted image. But when she moved her head, the faces didn't follow. They watched. Her breath fogged the visor of her mask. She wiped it clear with the back of her glove and whispered, "You're not real." The sound came back to her a moment later. Her own voice, identical in tone but not in timing. "You're not real." She took a step backward and felt the ground give slightly under her boot, as if the floor itself were sighing. The movement sent a tremor through the chamber, and every face in the ice seemed to inhale at once. The light from her lamp bent across them, refracting into thin lines that connected one to the next like veins of light in glass. She steadied herself, pressed her palm against the nearest wall, and felt warmth under the surface, faint, but alive. A pulse. It matched hers at first, then began to lead it. The ice mirrored her hand exactly, a perfect ghost of her fingers pressing from the other side. She pulled away, but the imprint remained, and the reflected hand began to move on its own. Slowly, deliberately, it raised its index finger and carved a thin line downward. The scratch was faint but audible, like a knife cutting paper. She spun around, the beam of her headlamp catching the mark. Another tally, another count. "No," she said too loud in the confined space. "Stop." The word echoed through the chamber, splitting and fracturing into smaller echoes until it became an overlapping chorus of her own voice. "Stop, stop, stop." She clamped her gloved hands over her ears, but the sound was inside her head now, humming with the vibration of the ice. Her oxygen regulator hissed in time with it. Short, fast bursts that no longer belonged to her control. She forced herself to slow her breathing. The gauge trembled around the halfway mark. She looked at the wall again. The reflection had changed. It wasn't a copy anymore. It was an accumulation, hundreds of her, layered through the translucent depth of the glacier, each one caught in a different gesture. Breathing, reaching, scratching, screaming. The deeper she looked, the further back they went, fading into darkness like fossils of herself preserved in time. Her lamp flickered once. In the brief darkness, she heard movement, the soft crackle of something shifting behind the ice, closer now. When the light returned, one of the figures had stepped forward. Its face was clearer than the rest. The same mouth, the same scar under the left eye. but its expression was calm where hers was not. It pressed a hand to the surface. Without meaning to, she matched it. Their palms aligned through the ice, and the warmth doubled, flooding through her arm until she felt her fingers ache. The figure's lips moved. "Breathe," it mouthed. She shook her head. "No." "Breathe," it mouthed again. And as it did, the regulator at her side clicked open. A hiss filled the chamber. Her lungs expanded involuntarily, following a rhythm that was no longer hers. She tried to step back, but her boots stuck to the floor. The ice had softened beneath her, half melted, gripping the soles like wet clay. "Let me go," she whispered. "Please." The reflection smiled, and every copy behind it smiled too, one after another, a ripple of identical expressions moving into the depths. Her lamp dimmed again, and in the dark she heard the sound of carving, the slow, patient scrape of metal against ice. When the light returned, her reflection was holding her chisel. That was impossible. The tool was still clipped to her belt. She looked down to be sure. It was gone. The reflection raised the chisel, pressed it to the inside of the ice, and began carving a spiral. Each motion mirrored the pattern she had found before, narrow loops, tightening toward a single point. The deeper it carved, the closer it seemed to her side of the glass, until fine cracks began to spread outward, glowing faintly from within. The noise grew, a low grinding that blended with the sound of her breathing. She realized the two rhythms were the same frequency. The act of carving was tied to the act of inhaling. The cave was shaping itself through her lungs. She wanted to close her eyes, to block it all out, but the light beneath the ice was hypnotic. Every loop of the spiral shimmered like molten gold, and at its center, she could see motion, something turning slowly, as if the glacier itself hit a heart. Her radio hissed. Clara. Her name again. Spoken softly, kindly, the way Neil used to say it before the expedition began. "Neil? Almost there," the voice said. "Just a little more." "More what?" The pause was long enough for her to hear her own blood moving in her ears. Then the voice said, "More breath." She stumbled backward, the ice under her boots cracking. The faces inside the wall turned toward her all at once. The spiral glowed brighter. She could see something pushing behind it. A dark oval shape pressing outward like a lung expanding after too long underwater. "No," she whispered. "No more." Her hand found the regulator valve, twisting it shut. The hiss stopped. Silence crashed over her like water. The reflections froze. The spiral dimmed. For a moment she thought she'd stopped it. Then she realized she could still hear breathing. Slow, steady, too loud to be hers. The ice around her began to fog, condensation blooming outward in perfect circles, as though exhaled from the inside. Each circle left a thin film of frost that thickened into words. Day 10, Day 11, Day 12. The writing multiplied, covering the walls until every surface shimmered with numbers. Her oxygen gauge stayed frozen at 900 pounds per square inches. She tapped it once. It didn't move. The figures in the ice began to fade, one by one, until only the one closest to her remained. It lifted its head and opened its mouth, but instead of words, a stream of bubbles escaped, rising through solid air, merging with the frost. The bubbles burst softly, and the sound they made was unmistakable, a single drawn-out exhale. The regulator at her side vibrated. The hose flexed like a living thing. Then, with a sudden jolt, it forced itself open. Cold air surged into her lungs. Too much, too fast. She doubled over, coughing, gasping. The reflection did the same, perfectly synchronized now. Every movement matched. The glass between them thinned to nothing. Her fingertips brushed against the surface and met flesh, cold, smooth, but alive. She felt a pull then, a slow drag forward, as though the ice were breathing her in. The floor tilted beneath her. Her knees hit the surface, her hands sinking deeper into the cold. She tried to scream, but the sound dissolved into vapor. The last thing she saw was her reflection leaning in close, whispering something she couldn't hear. Then it pressed its lips to the ice, and the world went dark. When light returned, she was standing on the other side of the wall. The chamber looked the same, but her tank was gone, her notebook gone, even the rope gone. On the floor, embedded in the ice where she had been, was another figure frozen mid-breath, eyes open, mouth parted. She touched the glass between them. The body's chest rose once, faintly, then stilled. Her own lungs filled easily, effortlessly, as though the air belonged to her again. But when she exhaled, the frost formed on the other side of the glass. Not this one. She was the reflection now. At first there was only the stillness, an endless white hum filling every crevice of the frozen chamber. Then came the faintest vibration, like a string plucked in the distance. Clara lifted her head. She didn't breathe. Not really. Whatever motion passed for breathing here was something the ice did for her. Her chest rose and fell automatically, though she no longer felt the air move. The vibration came again. It traveled through the walls, down into her bones. She pressed her ear to the glassy surface, and heard it more clearly now. The distinct crackle of a radio. Her name. Clara Hensley. Do you read? This is Rescue Unit Delta from Siglufjordur. We've got a signal ping from your locator. If you can hear me, respond. The voice was real, too clear to be imagined. For a moment, she felt something close to relief. Someone was coming, but then she remembered what she was, where she was, and the relief turned sour. The voice didn't sound distant. It sounded like it was inside the ice, transmitted through her own skull. She touched the surface. Frost bloomed under her fingertips in concentric circles, each pulse spreading out like ripples. The radio spoke again. We're 30 meters above the chamber. Movement sensors detect a cavity. Please hold position. She almost laughed. Hold position. She couldn't move more than a few steps in any direction before the walls turned to mirrors again. She tried to answer anyway. Her lips parted, but the sound that came out wasn't a word, it was static. A thin burst of air that fogged the wall and left behind her own name written in frost. She stared at it. The letters faded, but the echo of her attempt must have gone somewhere, because the radio answered. Copy that. We've got a faint vocal response. She's alive. The hum inside the cave deepened. The walls around her brightened, glowing faintly blue, as if awakening. She looked up and saw lines of light running through the ice, crossing over each other, forming a pattern she didn't recognize, geometry etched in ice and air. Each pulse matched her heartbeat, or what she thought might still be her heartbeat. The voice on the radio changed, softer now, uncertain. Clara, if you can hear me, stay calm. We're drilling a small access tunnel. Do not move. Repeat, do not move. Above her, the ceiling vibrated. The ice shuddered, releasing a rain of tiny crystals that fell soundlessly through the air. The movement stirred something deep in her memory, the first collapse, the shock of weight, the instant she thought she'd die. For a second, she almost welcomed it. But this wasn't a collapse. It was something slower, measured. The drilling sound grew louder, dull at first, then sharp. Each rotation of the drill bit came through the ice as a mechanical heartbeat, steady and exact. The reflected faces in the walls stirred. They began to move again, their mouths forming silent shapes. She stepped back, away from the falling dust. No, she whispered, though no sound followed. The reflections shook their heads in unison, lips forming the same word. No. The drilling stopped. The radio crackled once, then twice, a burst of white noise that filled the chamber. Then another voice, younger, uncertain. We've hit a thin layer. There's movement inside. Something's hold on, pressure spike, reading unstable. The rest dissolved into static. The ice beneath her feet vibrated violently now. The reflections in the walls blurred, shifting from faces to shadows, to something else entirely, dark silhouettes pressing against the glass, trying to come through. The pattern of light in the walls changed again, and she realized with dread that it wasn't random geometry. It was a map of the tunnels, of her descent, every loop and chamber traced perfectly. At the center, where she stood, the lines converged into a spiral identical to the one she'd seen before. A voice whispered behind her. They shouldn't open it. She turned. The reflection nearest to her had stepped forward again. It was her face, her posture, but the eyes were empty, black hollows filled with motion. "Who are you?" she mouthed. The reflection smiled faintly. "I'm what's left when you stopped counting." The sound of the drill resumed overhead, sharper now, closer. Fractures spidered through the ceiling, spreading across the chamber in delicate threads of light. The other reflections pressed their hands against the walls, their mouths moving faster, their silent rhythm perfectly aligned with the rotation of the drill. She felt the pull again, the invisible tug at her chest, the same sensation as before, when the cave had made her its mirror. The air grew thicker, compressing, the pressure so strong it made her ears ring. The regulator on her old tank, the one frozen beside her other body, hissed faintly. The reflection whispered, "They think they're saving you." The sound of breaking glass filled the air. A crack ripped across the ceiling and a beam of light broke through, cutting the darkness like a blade. Snow and dust cascaded into the chamber. For a second, she could see the drill, a long steel auger descending slowly, gleaming in the beam of an external lamp. Behind it, shadows of figures in bright red suits moved cautiously. The radio burst to life again, the signal sharp and clear. "We see the chamber. Visibility low, temperature 30 below. There's something." The rest cut off. The figures froze. One of them turned his helmet light downward and saw her through the ice. He lifted a hand. Clara lifted hers. For an instant, it felt almost human contact across an impossible distance. Then, the vibrations changed. The light from his lamp refracted through the ice in jagged shards, bouncing back into his visor. His movement became jerky, stuttering. The reflection behind her whispered, "They've entered the breath." She didn't understand until she saw the frost forming on the rescuer's helmet. It crept upward, fast and alive, tracing patterns like veins across the glass. The man stumbled, tried to shout, but no sound came. The air around him crystallized, thickening, pulling him toward the hole in the ceiling. Another rescuer grabbed his arm, but the frost spread through both suits, connecting them like a web. Their lights flickered, then dimmed. The drill began to rotate again on its own, the motor whining at a higher pitch. Clara screamed, or thought she did, but all that came out was a low hum, the same tone that filled the glacier. The reflection beside her leaned close and whispered, "You see? Every breath taken here becomes part of the ice. You should have stopped sooner." She shook her head violently. "No, they'll get out." "They won't," the reflection said. "You didn't." Above them, the light faltered. The rescue line snapped upward, recoiling into the dark. The figures were gone. Only their breath remained a faint mist swirling where they had been, freezing instantly into delicate tendrils that drifted downward and merged with the air around her. The radio clicked once more, faint and distant. "Clara," it said, her voice again. "You made it." "No," she mouthed. "I didn't." "Yes," said the echo. "You did. You're part of it now. You're what they'll hear when they listen." She looked up at the opening. The light there pulsed faintly, like the last heartbeat of the Sunday. The frost climbed higher up the walls, tracing new lines, sealing the cracks. She could hear the outside world fading, the sound of wind, the faint rumble of engines, until only the glacier's breathing remained. The radio slipped from her hand, hit the floor with a hollow sound. The static filled the chamber, one last time. Then the reflection stepped forward and wrapped its arms around her. The contact was weightless, but complete, like falling into warm water. The walls pulsed once, then stilled. The spiral of light in the ceiling collapsed into a single bright point, then faded. When the silence returned, there was no Clara, no reflection, no separation between them. The chamber was empty except for a faint shimmer caught in the ice, something that looked, from a distance, like a figure caught mid-inhale. A week later, the rescue team returned. The drill site was abandoned, the cavity sealed. Instruments recorded faint rhythmic vibrations emanating from below, too regular to be tectonic, too organic to be mechanical. They set up microphones against the glacier's surface. For 12 minutes, the recordings captured only the sound of wind. Then a woman's voice spoke, soft and distant. Vatnheim Hollow, Day 1. This is Clara Hensley. Air pressure stable, proceeding deeper. And after a pause, barely audible, breathe with me. There was no more time. There hadn't been for a while, though. While itself had stopped meaning anything. Inside Vatnheim Hollow, everything had folded inward. The glacier no longer felt like a place, but like a lung, expanding and contracting so slowly that it created the illusion of stillness. The last thing the world above had heard from Clara Hensley was a breath, one long, steady exhalation that never seemed to end. And then, even that went quiet. But Clara didn't die. She stood in a chamber that was both familiar and entirely foreign, a space made of light and memory instead of ice and stone. The air glowed faintly blue, soft and endless, and when she moved, her reflection followed not from mirrors anymore, but from the air itself. The glacier had copied her perfectly, down to the weight of her breath, the rhythm of her heart. She tried to speak, but her voice no longer made sound. The words came as a vibration that shimmered through the walls, forming frost patterns that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Each one looked like a word she couldn't quite read. Around her, the walls pulsed faintly. Inhale, exhale. She thought, am I breathing for it, or is it breathing for me? The answer came, not as a voice, but as movement. The walls leaned inward slightly, and she felt air flow into her chest. When she exhaled, the light dimmed. They were one now. She turned toward where the rescue tunnel had once been. It was gone. The ceiling stretched upward into infinite white, the sound of the surface long erased. Somewhere in the frozen distance, the faintest vibration still trembled. A world that hadn't realized it had already lost her. And yet, sometimes, she could hear them, faint voices, traveling down through the layers of compressed air and millennia of snow. They came like radio static, fragments of life reduced to sound. Laughter, a shout, the groan of an engine, a song carried by wind. Each time she heard them, her body, or what was left of it, stirred. The glacier responded too. Its breathing grew shallower, as if listening. She thought of her first expedition to Iceland years ago, of her father's voice over the phone telling her that the earth forgets faster than humans do. Stone remembers pressure, not pain, he had said. She wondered if he'd been wrong. She reached out and touched the nearest wall. Beneath the translucent surface, she saw the faint shadow of her body still lying where it had fallen. The suit was stiff, the helmet cracked. Her own hand was pressed against the ice, in perfect alignment with hers now. For a long moment she just stared. Then, without thinking, she pressed harder. The ice yielded. It was like pushing through the skin of water resistance at first, then surrender. Her fingers passed through, her palm, her arm, until she was touching herself. The instant her gloved fingers met the frozen ones beneath, a surge of warmth flooded through the chamber. The ice began to move. At first, it was just sound, cracks snapping through the air like brittle bone. Then came motion. The ceiling shuddered. Thin sheets of frost peeled away from the walls and drifted like ash. The glacier was shifting again, but not collapsing. It was exhaling. Every reflection she'd ever seen bloomed back into existence, surrounding her like a halo. Dozens of her, hundreds, each frozen in a different gesture, scratching, counting, breathing, whispering. They moved together now, synchronized. The air vibrated with their collective breath. 1. The whisper filled her head. 2. Each number made the glacier tremble. 3. The ice cracked, a spiderweb of fissures racing outward through the walls. 4. She understood now that the counting had never been for her. It was the glacier's rhythm, the heartbeat it had borrowed from her body to keep itself alive. And now it was reaching the end of its sequence. 5. The walls began to collapse inward, not violently, but with the inevitability of something finishing a long, patient inhale. She could feel the weight of time folding into itself, layers of snow and air compressing into glass. 6. Light burst through the cracks. She saw them again, the rescuers, or what was left of them, suspended above, their suits embedded in ice, faces calm, eyes open. The frost had preserved them perfectly. They looked peaceful, like figures inside a cathedral window. 7. She tried to speak their names, but no sound came. Only vapor, curling from her mouth and forming words that didn't belong to her. The cave whispered them back. 8. She felt herself unraveling. Not dying, not fading, but becoming. Her breath no longer belonged to lungs. It was the movement of pressure through air, the slow shift of wind across frozen corridors. She felt the glacier expanding through her chest, stretching outward, its pulse syncing with hers until there was no difference. 9. The last of the light from above disappeared. The spiral of cracks converged at the center of the ceiling, the same pattern she'd seen etched in the walls before. She realized now what it represented. Not a map of the tunnels, but of the breathing cycle itself, a diagram of time collapsing, over and over, until everything folded into one final breath. 10. The glacier exhaled. The sound was not violent. It was beautiful. A low, resonant sigh that rolled through the ice and up into the world above, carrying with it the last traces of sound and warmth. Snow lifted into the air, scattering light in every direction. On the surface, the research camp instruments recorded a pressure wave traveling outward from Vatnheim Hollow. It was small, harmless. The reading showed only a brief spike in temperature, less than a second. The team wrote it off as a thermal anomaly. But one technician swore he heard something in the playback. A woman's breath drawn in slowly and released even slower. Then a voice. 1. He increased the volume. 2. Static filled the recording. 3. He turned it off after that. Back below, Clara no longer saw the chamber. She stood inside light itself, endless and pulsing. The numbers continued, slower now, stretching across impossible distances. 4. She tried to remember her life before the cave, faces, cities, the smell of rain, but memory had lost its edges. Everything that had ever been hers was now suspended in the glacier's breath, endless and weightless. 5. She realized then that she was not alone. The glacier held others, echoes of breath, fragments of people who had walked across its surface, spoken near it, dreamed above it. Every voice the ice had ever captured whispered through her now. 6. They were not trapped. They were preserved, waiting for the next collapse, the next heartbeat, the next inhalation. 7. The world above would hear them again someday, when the ice melted. The sound would rise through the air, mistaken for wind. 8. She could already feel the warmth of it, the slow return of motion, the anticipation of being heard. 9. She wondered who would be listening. 10. The glacier drew in its final breath. On the surface, the sky dimmed briefly, though no one noticed. The snowfields rippled once, as if the earth itself had sighed. Beneath the ice, the chamber sealed completely. The last traces of movement vanished. Centuries would pass. The ice would advance, retreat, shift. The world would forget the name, Vatnheim Hollow. But sometimes, when the wind passed over the frozen valleys, travelers would swear they heard counting in the distance. Faint, rhythmic, patient. They'd pause, hold their breath, and listen. And if they were very quiet, they might hear it reach the final number. Then the wind would stop, and the earth for a moment would hold its breath again. Story 3. The Empty Seat. It was one of those nights when the city felt hollow, like a lung that had already exhaled everything it had to give. The streets shimmered under a thin film of rain, the kind that never falls so much as it hangs in the air, breathing with the same rhythm as the hum of passing tires. David liked those hours best. Between midnight and 3, the world was quieter, cleaner in its loneliness. The day's noise had drained away, and what was left belonged only to him and the low purr of his car. He'd been driving for 8 hours, maybe 9. Time folded differently out here, stretched between red lights and blue screens, between one stranger's destination and the next. He'd been thinking of calling it a night when the phone mounted on the dashboard blinked awake. A soft ding followed, That familiar chime that meant someone, somewhere, had decided they needed to be driven through the darkness. Pickup, Franklin Avenue, and 12th. Destination, Redwood Apartments, East Side. Name, Jesse. He hesitated. Franklin and 12th was an odd spot for a pickup. No bars, no restaurants, no convenience stores, just a stretch of old factories turned into storage units and an empty church lot that had burned the winter before. The kind of place where silence lived, comfortably. But the fare was decent, and the city at that hour had a way of daring him to say no. He hit accept. The blue navigation line unfurled across the screen, leading him through side streets that felt like tunnels. The fog had thickened by then, smudging the neon into soft streaks of color. He rolled the window halfway down, letting the night air brush his face. It was sharp and damp, with that metallic tang of rain on asphalt, a smell he'd always liked. It reminded him of waiting, and of things not yet said. He turned onto Franklin and slowed, the wipers slicing the windshield in their slow rhythm. The pickup pin blinked just ahead, by the remains of the church. He parked by the curb, hazard lights blinking in the dark, and sent the usual message through the app. Here, black Camry, hazard lights on. No reply. He waited, fingers drumming the steering wheel. The streetlight above him buzzed faintly, flickered, then steadied into a dim orange glow. The burned church stood in silence across the street, its windows like black eyes filled with fog. Another ding. A reply. I see you. He glanced around, but saw no one. The sidewalks were empty. He leaned slightly forward, peering into the mirror, then caught movement near the edge of the lot, a shadow stepping out from behind a leaning fence. A woman, maybe in her 20s, long hair hidden under a hood, a phone glowing faintly in her hand. She didn't hurry, just walked straight to the car and opened the back door without a word. The weight shifted the suspension slightly as she sat down. The door clicked shut with a soft finality, and the air inside cooled. David looked at the mirror. The back seat was swallowed by shadow, only the faint reflection of her phone visible, its blue light trembling against her knees. He smiled politely, the way all drivers do when trying not to intrude. Evening. Jesse, right? No answer. Her head stayed lowered, eyes fixed on her screen. A second later, his phone buzzed. Jesse? Yes. He blinked. The message came through the Uber app's built-in chat. Okay, he said, keeping his tone neutral. Seatbelt, please. The buckle clicked somewhere behind him. He shifted into drive. The car rolled forward, tires whispering over wet pavement. The destination appeared automatically on the map. Redwood Apartments, 23 minutes away. The silence settled between them. Usually he'd turn on the radio, something soft and wordless to fill the space. But something about the quiet felt deliberate, like she'd brought it with her. Another buzz. Jesse. You can leave the music off. He nodded. Sure thing. He drove. The rain thickened, drumming gently on the roof, a steady, patient rhythm. Neon from the late-night storefronts bled through the windows and painted the interior in slow waves of red and green. He tried not to glance in the mirror too often. There was something uncomfortable about seeing a passenger who didn't want to be seen, like catching someone mid-thought. 10 minutes passed before the next message appeared. Jesse, how long have you been driving tonight? David smiled faintly. The question was normal enough. About 9 hours. You the last ride before I head home. Jesse, do you drive this late often? Sometimes. Jesse, you must see strange things. He chuckled softly. You could say that. The reply came quickly this time, like she'd been waiting. Jesse, like what? He hesitated, watching the yellow lines slide past under the glow of his headlights. Oh, you know, people falling asleep mid-sentence, drunks trying to pay me in gum. The usual. No response. He checked the mirror again. She was still there, motionless, her phone glowing faintly in her lap. For a second, he thought he saw her reflection in the glass, a pale outline of a face, but the angle was wrong, the light uneven. He looked back at the road. Another buzz. Jesse, do you ever feel like you're being followed? He frowned. Not really. Why? No response. He drove another 2 blocks before another message appeared. Jesse. Never mind. He sighed quietly. Night riders. You learn not to ask too much. They passed a row of shuttered shops, their metal gates slick with rain. A stray cat darted across the street, its shadow elongated by the headlights. The city was shrinking around them, buildings closing in, the air thick with fog. Then, another ding. Jesse. You missed a turn. He glanced at the map. He hadn't. The GPS line was clear, unbroken. We're good, he said. Jesse. No. You missed it. The phone blinked red for a second, recalculating, and then suddenly the route did shift. The new line redirected them through a narrower street, darker, barely lit. He slowed. All right, he said carefully. Looks like it updated. Jesse. Better that way. He didn't reply. He turned down the street. The car's headlights brushed against a row of old houses, their windows blind and hollow. One of the porch lights flickered as he passed, a faint pulse of yellow in the fog. The next message came slower this time, almost hesitant. Jesse, sorry for being quiet. I don't talk much anymore. That's okay, he said. Jesse. Sometimes it's easier to text. He smiled to himself. I get that. Then, without thinking, he asked, Rough night? No reply. Just the sound of the tires. They hit a red light. The rain was lighter now, more of a whisper than a fall. He reached to adjust the air vent and caught something in the reflection of the passenger window. It was faint, almost invisible, a second face, blurred, sitting in the front seat. He blinked hard, looked again. Nothing. The phone buzzed. Jesse, you okay? He forced a laugh. Yeah, just zoning out. Jesse, good. Stay focused. The light turned green. He drove. He tried to ignore the goosebumps rising on his arms. He told himself it was exhaustion, nothing more. 9 hours behind the wheel could make shadows out of anything. Then came another ding. Jesse, can I ask something strange? Sure. Jesse, do you see anything sitting in the passenger seat? His grip tightened on the wheel. He glanced right. The seat was empty. The fabric glistened faintly in the dash light, undisturbed. He forced a smile he didn't feel. No. Why? Jesse. Because I do. The message sat on the screen, glowing softly. He waited for another one, but none came. They drove on in silence, the night pressing closer, the sound of the rain thinning to almost nothing. He thought about speaking to break the tension, to remind himself there was a human being behind that voice, but something in the air warned him not to. The car's cabin felt smaller now. He could hear his own breathing louder than before. Another ding. Jesse, don't look in the mirror right now. He froze. The road ahead was empty, slick with water and red reflections from the taillights of cars miles away. Why not? He asked quietly. The reply came almost instantly. Jesse, because it's already looking at you. He didn't look. Not yet. His hand stayed locked at 10 and 2, knuckles pale. The road narrowed. The city's last streetlight, fading into the fog behind him. The only light left was the glow of the phone, the soft, patient pulse of another message waiting to be read. Jesse, don't worry. It never stays long. He swallowed, tried to breathe. What never stays long? No reply. The app froze for a second, then refreshed. The passenger name changed. It no longer said Jesse. It said unknown rider. He drove on, the car gliding silent through a city that seemed to hold its breath. And somewhere behind him or beside him, something else breathed too. The sound of rain had faded to a hush now, more vibration than weather, and the city had gone still in that strange way it does when every window decides to stop reflecting. The streets were empty, painted in streaks of dull light from David's headlights, and for the first time that night, he became aware of how loud the car actually was, the hum of the tires, the low whine of the wiper motor, the soft static that filled the air vents like breath. The phone buzzed once. He jumped. Unknown rider. You drive carefully. David exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to calm. Thanks, he said aloud, because talking to the screen made it feel less like thinking. He didn't know when the name on the app had changed, maybe when the signal dropped, maybe when they turned off the main roads, but it didn't feel like a glitch. He'd driven long enough to know that some nights the system hiccuped, added phantom riders, changed icons, froze mid-route. Technology wasn't perfect, but this didn't feel like that. He tapped the profile icon anyway, just to reassure himself, but the page was blank. No picture, no rating, no trip history, only a circle with a single gray dot pulsing inside it, as though something were breathing on the other end of the connection. Another ding. Unknown rider. You don't talk much either. He forced a chuckle. Guess we're both quiet types. The reply came instantly, faster than typing should allow. Unknown rider. You weren't always. David's hands tightened on the wheel. He stared at the message, wondering if he'd misread it, if fatigue had made the words blur together. But no, the sentence was clear, deliberate. You weren't always. He swallowed hard and tried to focus on the road. Look, Jesse, or whoever, if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. Nothing. Then, as if the silence itself had waited long enough, unknown rider, you keep saying Jesse, like she's still here. He flicked his eyes toward the rearview mirror. The back seat stared back at him, empty as before. The faint glow from the dashboard illuminated the headrests and the soft sheen of rain on the rear window. No movement, no shadow. He checked the time. 1:52 a.m. The trip should have been over by now. He tapped the screen, but the app wouldn't close. The navigation arrow spun uselessly, trapped in place. He tried again. Nothing. The phone's light seemed weaker somehow, its glow swallowed by the dark interior. The next message arrived. Unprompted. Unknown rider. I can see you checking. You don't have to. David's pulse spiked. He forced a deep breath, one hand gripping the wheel tighter. Okay, he muttered half to himself. Glitch. GPS is lagging. App's lagging. Someone's playing around. But the words didn't sound convincing, even in his own voice. He drove on. The road narrowed into a series of curves lined with warehouses and old lampposts that gave more shadow than light. Each turn looked like the last, the same graffiti, the same boarded windows. He could have sworn he'd been there before. Another ding. Unknown rider. You've been here before. He slammed the brakes, hard enough to jolt his body forward against the belt. The car idled in the middle of the road, engine murmuring. He stared at the screen. What did you just say? The reply came. Steady, polite. Unknown rider. You always stop here. You always ask that. He glanced outside. The rain had stopped, but everything still looked wet, as if time hadn't decided whether to move forward yet. The buildings leaned slightly inward, as though listening. He whispered, Who are you? Unknown rider. Keep driving. He hesitated, then shifted back into drive. The car rolled forward slowly, the tires whispering against the slick pavement. The street bent again, and he realized with a small chill that the intersection ahead was the same one he'd just left. Same streetlight, same half-collapsed billboard. The GPS blinked, then caught up, reloading the route. It pointed him in a circle. He followed it anyway. Ding. Unknown rider. You're learning. He didn't answer. He pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to break whatever loop this was, to reach a familiar street, a noise, a sign of life. But the road stretched longer instead of shorter. The map turned blank. No buildings, no data, just a gray void around his blue arrow. Then, faintly, through the rain-smeared windshield, he saw movement again. A person, maybe, standing near the corner. He slowed. The figure didn't move. It looked like someone waiting for a ride still, patient, half-turned toward the street. He blinked, and it was gone. His phone buzzed again. Unknown rider. Don't pick her up this time. His skin prickled. What do you mean this time? Unknown rider. You'll see soon. He pressed the accelerator harder. The tires hissed against the road, sending up thin sprays of water. He passed the burned church again. The pickup point. The world folded into itself. He looked down at the app. It had reset. Pickup. Franklin Avenue and 12th. Destination. Redwood Apartments. Name. Jesse. His throat tightened. No, he whispered. No, no, no. The back seat was empty, but the door indicator light flashed briefly on the dash rear right door open. He checked the mirror. The door was shut. Still, the sensor blinked red, then green, then red again, like a heartbeat. Another ding. Jesse, thanks for coming back. His hands went cold. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips. Jesse, he said barely above a whisper, you already got in the car. You've been here the whole time. No reply. Then, Jesse. Not me. The other one. He stared at the screen until his vision blurred. The headlights ahead caught something, a glint of metal, the slick curve of a car window, parked on the curb. A black Camry. His Camry. Same plates. Same dent in the bumper. The phone buzzed again. Jesse, you're late this time. The message stayed there, pulsing faintly as though the screen itself were breathing. He slowed to a crawl, heart hammering in his chest. He stared at the twin car ahead. The driver inside looked familiar, same hands on the wheel, same dark jacket, same shape of the head. The man in the other car turned his face toward him, and for a moment David saw himself. He slammed the brakes. The image vanished. The street was empty again. He sat there in the middle of the road, chest rising and falling too fast. The wipers smearing rain across the windshield in uneven arcs. The phone buzzed again, harder this time. Jesse, you saw it, didn't you? He didn't answer. Jesse, you never believe it until then. He reached to end the trip, to shut everything down, but the screen stayed frozen. The end trip button dimmed out like a dying light. Then a new message appeared. This one from the app itself, not from Jesse. System notification. Rider has canceled. Payment will not be processed. He let out a shuddering breath. Relief, confusion both felt the same right then. But before he could pull over, the screen refreshed again. The same blue line drawing across the map. New ride request. Pickup, Franklin and 12th. Destination, Redwood Apartments. He laughed then, a dry, broken sound that barely left his throat. No, I'm done. I'm done. He pressed decline. The app ignored him. Another chime. Pickup confirmed. He dropped the phone into the passenger seat. It buzzed once more, vibrating against the leather. He glanced at it out of reflex. A message glowed faintly on the dark screen. Unknown rider. Don't look beside you. He froze. His hand hovered halfway between the steering wheel and the phone. Why? He whispered. The reply appeared without a sound this time. Unknown rider. Because she's already there. He turned his head, slowly. Too slowly. Like a dream trying to wake itself up. The passenger seat looked empty. But in the faint reflection of the window, he could see something, a pale outline. The suggestion of a face leaning close. Eyes watching him through the glass. He blinked. It was gone. The phone buzzed again. Unknown rider. Good. Keep driving. Head did. For the next several minutes, or hours, or whatever time had become, he just drove. Through streets that circled back on themselves, through intersections that repeated like film loops, through a city that seemed to be rehearsing the same breath over and over. He didn't check the phone again, until the sky began to lighten faintly. Not from dawn, but from the white hum of the street lamps fighting the fog. The message waiting for him was simple. Jesse, thank you for the ride. He blinked at it. The name had changed again. He glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see movement. The back seat was still empty, but the passenger seat, the seatbelt indicator light had turned on. The seatbelt indicator glowed a faint red on the dashboard, pulsing like a heartbeat. A quiet, rhythmic blink, fast, steady, impossible. David's first instinct was to brush it off as another glitch, Another bad sensor reading the kind that happens when moisture sneaks into the wiring after a week of rain. But as he stared at it, he realized it was blinking in perfect time with his own pulse. Every thud in his chest, every shallow breath, blink, blink, blink. He placed a hand on the passenger seat. The leather was cold, not damp, not dirty, just cold, as though it had been outside for hours. His fingertips tingled from the contact, an almost static-like buzz. He pulled his hand back quickly, eyes flicking toward the window. The fog had thickened again, pressed close against the glass, so dense that even the reflection of his own face looked unfamiliar, paler, thinner, like someone who'd been awake too long in someone else's body. The phone buzzed once from where it lay on the console. He didn't want to look. He already knew the sound too well, the polite, neutral ding that had become a heartbeat of its own. He looked anyway. Unknown writer. Don't touch her. The words sat there. Plain. Clean. Impossible to misread. His throat went dry. "Who is this?" he whispered. "Unknown writer." "You already know." He reached for the phone, swiping to exit the chat, but the screen didn't respond. The text bubble pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. He tried to power it off. The button clicked, but the display stayed on, pale and steady. The seatbelt light blinked twice, then stopped. He looked up just as the buckle beside him clicked into place. A sound so small it could have been imagined, a clean, mechanical snap of metal sliding into metal. He froze. The passenger seat shifted almost imperceptibly, like someone had just adjusted their weight. The faint hiss of leather, the smell of rain, old rain, trapped in fabric, crept into the cabin. He didn't turn his head. He couldn't. Instead, he stared straight ahead at the road, the long ribbon of gray that cut through a city that no longer seemed to have edges. The headlights painted the asphalt silver, but nothing reflected back. No buildings, no signs, no movement. He whispered, "Jesse?" Silence. Then, from the phone, "Jesse, keep driving." His jaw clenched. He gripped the wheel tighter, the tendons in his hand standing out like cords. "Where to?" he asked, voice low. The answer came after a long pause. "Jesse, you already know the way." He did. Somehow, he did. The road stretched ahead, familiar in a way that made his stomach twist. He had driven it before, or dreamed it, or both. The turns appeared before the map could show them. The lights flickered in a sequence he recognized but couldn't place. Every few seconds, the seat creaked softly beside him, as though someone were shifting position, leaning closer. The phone buzzed again. "Jesse, do you ever wonder what happens to the ones who never get dropped off?" He swallowed. "What?" "Jesse, not everyone makes it to their destination. Sometimes the car keeps moving. Sometimes the ride never ends." He shook his head. "This isn't funny, Jesse. No one's laughing." He tried the radio, desperate for sound, for something human, something else. Static poured through the speakers, dense and wet, the kind that feels like it's breathing with you. Beneath the noise, he thought he heard voices muffled, distant, like the hum of a crowd through a closed door. He turned the volume down, heart hammering. The static didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from the passenger seat. A faint crackle, rhythmic, as though the air itself was tuning itself into words. He turned his head slowly, too slowly, and saw the seatbelt buckle quivering, the metal vibrating against the leather. The sound rose in pitch, almost forming syllables. "Stop," he whispered. The noise cut off instantly. The silence that followed was worse. He reached for his phone again. The screen was still open to the chat. The last message had changed. "Jesse, you heard me." His breath hitched. "What do you want from me?" "Jesse, I want you to remember." He frowned. Remember what? But even as he asked, something deep in him stirred a faint tug, like a dream being pulled up from the dark. Rain. A stretch of highway. A girl sitting behind him, quiet, polite, always looking out the window. He'd picked her up outside a church that had burned, same as tonight. She'd asked him to take her home. But there hadn't been a home. Only the fog. Only the road that looped back on itself. He remembered the crash. Then the screech of tires, the flash of glass, the sound of her voice. A single word. Stop. He blinked hard, gripping the wheel. The images dissolved, leaving only the road ahead, endless and gray. The phone buzzed again. Jesse. You kept driving. His knuckles whitened. That wasn't my fault. Jesse. You didn't stop. I tried. Jesse. You didn't look back. His vision blurred. The fog outside the car thickened, swallowing the edges of the world. The headlights hit nothing. He whispered, "Where are we?" Jesse. Exactly where you left me. The seatbelt light blinked once more, brighter this time. He turned his head before he could stop himself. And there she was. Not a shadow, not a reflection, her. Jesse. Or what was left of her. She sat upright, perfectly still, her head tilted slightly toward him. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, hair clinging to her face as though still wet. Her eyes wide, colorless, watched him without blinking. The faintest smile tugged at her lips. He couldn't move. The air felt too heavy to breathe. She tilted her head further, and when she spoke, her voice wasn't sound. It was vibration. The same hum that filled the car. You shouldn't have kept driving. His mouth moved, but no words came. His throat locked around the air. She leaned closer. The smell of cold water filled the cabin. You saw the light. You heard the brakes, and still you didn't stop. He tried to speak, to explain, but she lifted a finger, small, pale, trembling, and pressed it to her lips. Now it's your turn, she whispered. The phone buzzed again. Jesse, don't let go of the wheel. He looked down just long enough to see it, and when he looked up, the road was gone. Nothing but white. His foot slammed the brake pedal, but the car didn't slow. The world outside had turned to fog and motion, directionless. The headlights reached no farther than the hood. The engine roared, tires spinning against a surface he couldn't see. The steering wheel vibrated beneath his hands, fighting him. The seatbelt light blinked faster, faster, until it was just a solid beam. He shouted, "What do you want from me?" The phone buzzed. Jesse, to finish the ride. He tried to turn, to face her, but the wheel locked. The car veered on its own. He could feel gravity shift, the pull sideways, then down like falling into water. The fog outside shimmered, rippled, broke apart. For a heartbeat, he saw something else beneath it, lights flashing red, glass scattered like diamonds, an overturned car. His car, and a figure slumped in the driver's seat. Him. The phone buzzed one last time. Jesse, you see now. The world stilled. The fog cleared. The car rolled slowly to a stop. He blinked, dazed, chest heaving, hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. The road stretched ahead, empty, clean, dry. The rain was gone. The sky above was an impossible gray. The seat beside him was empty again. The seatbelt light was off. He looked down at the phone. The app had closed. The screen was black. He reached for it and felt something wet on his fingers. He lifted his hand. A smear of condensation, clear and perfect, shaped like fingerprints, not his own. He stared at the window. In the faint fogged reflection, he thought he saw someone sitting beside him again, head turned toward him, watching. He blinked. The image vanished. The dashboard chimed once. New ride request. Pickup. Franklin Avenue and 12th. Destination. Redwood Apartments. Name. Jesse. David stared at the glowing screen. Pulse still hammering. He didn't touch it. He didn't move. The phone accepted the ride on its own. The phone's glow bathed the cabin in a faint, colorless light. The kind that doesn't warm anything, only outlines it. David's hands were trembling on the wheel, his skin slick with cold sweat that didn't seem to dry. Outside, the world was no longer city, no longer streets. It was just motion. and light, endless gray distance that folded into itself like fog over a mirror. The car hummed beneath him, steady and obedient, though he hadn't touched the pedals since the ride reappeared on the screen. He could feel the vibration through his legs, through his chest, through his teeth, that low, soft drone of a machine that had decided it no longer needed its driver. The phone chimed once, gently. "Jesse, don't worry. It's easier this time." He swallowed hard. His voice came out thinner than he expected. "What time, Jesse?" "The next one." He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "There's not going to be a next one." But even as he said it, the car turned on its own, smooth and deliberate, the headlights cutting through a corridor of pale air. And when he looked out through the windshield, he saw something ahead, a familiar shimmer of metal, a reflection that grew clearer the closer he came. Another car. Same make, same model. Black Camry. Headlights off. Parked dead center in the road. He slowed. His foot found the brake, almost without thinking. The engine purred, waiting. The other car's windshield was dark, but as his own lights fell across it, he saw the outline of someone sitting inside. A man. The man's head turned slowly toward him. David's stomach dropped. It was him, not a reflection, not a trick of glass. Him. He could see every detail. The same jacket, same lines in the forehead, same scar on the left hand. But this version of him was staring through him, eyes empty, unmoving, like something remembering how to see. The phone vibrated in the console. "Jesse, don't stop this time." He shook his head, voice cracking. "What are you talking about, Jesse? You stopped last time. That's why you're still here." He looked back up. The other David had lifted a hand, palm against the glass. For a split second, the windshield reflected both of them, two identical drivers caught in the same act of disbelief. Then the other car flickered, like bad film. The lights inside flashed once. The figure in the driver's seat dissolved into mist. His car rolled forward on its own. The road straightened. The air cleared. He was moving again. He didn't remember pressing the gas. His phone buzzed once more. "Jesse, you see now how it happens?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. He tried to think of something practical: navigation, radio, hazard lights, anything that tethered him to the world of buttons and cause and effect. He pressed every switch he could find. Nothing responded. The dashboard lights dimmed and brightened with the rhythm of breathing. In the passenger seat, the leather gave a soft sigh. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He could see her in the glass now in the faint reflection of the side window. Jessie. Her head tilted toward him, hair dark with moisture, eyes fixed forward. Not looking at him, but through him, as though she were watching someone farther down the road. He whispered, "Why me?" Her reflection smiled faintly. The phone buzzed again. "Jesse, because you never finished the ride." He pressed his palm to his forehead. "I tried. You were gone. I called for help. Jesse, you didn't finish it." The road ahead began to split. Faint ghost lanes branching off from the main path like cracks in a mirror. In each one, he caught flashes, other versions of his car, other versions of himself, some driving, some sitting still, some empty entirely. Each shadow lane flickered and vanished as quickly as it appeared. He realized then that he wasn't following a road anymore. He was driving through reflections of every drive that had ever happened, each one looping back to the same pickup point. The same name, the same destination, Franklin Avenue and 12th, Redwood Apartments. The car slowed again, though he hadn't touched the brakes. The air thickened. The headlights bent forward and then downward, striking glass instead of asphalt. He was driving onto a mirror. A perfect silver surface stretched endlessly ahead of him, reflecting the skyless void above. The tires made no sound. The phone screen flickered. For the first time, the text was not from Jesse. Driver support. Incoming communication from previous trip. David stared at it. What does that mean? The text refreshed. Message from David H. 1 hour ago. Don't pick her up. His breath caught. What? Before he could finish, another message appeared. Identical format. Same sender. Message from David H. Yesterday. Doesn't end if you keep driving. Then a third. Message from David H. Unknown. Tell the next one to stop. He looked up from the screen. The mirror road stretched ahead forever, littered with shaped silhouettes of cars scattered across the glass, each one dark, each one perfectly still. As his headlights passed over them, the interiors lit up. Inside every one, a driver. Every driver looked like him, some wide-eyed, some asleep, some staring straight ahead, mouths open in silent screams. He reached for the door handle without thinking, the instinctive pull of wanting out. But when he pressed it, the latch didn't move. The phone buzzed again. Jesse, don't try to leave. They'll all feel it. He looked back at her reflection. The fog had thinned just enough to show the edge of her face, the shape of her cheekbone, the hollow of her throat. But it wasn't her anymore. The features were wrong, softer, almost like his own seen through warped glass. You're not Jesse, he whispered. Her reflection smiled. Jesse, I told you. I'm whoever stays. He gritted his teeth. You said you wanted to finish the ride. Fine. Tell me how. The phone stayed blank for a long time. Then, slowly, one word appeared. Jesse. Look. He didn't want to, but he did. The mirror road ahead shimmered again. And for a moment, he saw what lay beneath the surface. A river of faces, pressed against the underside of the glass, mouths open, bubbles escaping, each one whispering the same thing in silence. Stop the car. He slammed the brake pedal. The tires screamed, or maybe it was him, and the car skidded, fishtailing across the slick silver plain. For a second, he thought he'd done it, thought the nightmare would break. Then the world folded backward, everything inverted, the car's nose tilted downward. And suddenly he was driving not on the mirror but through it. The sky flipped. The reflection became the real, and the real became nothing. The phone's screen turned black, then white, then black again. A voice, faint but familiar, came through the speakers, distorted, like a recording played underwater. David, it said. Can you hear me? He recognized it instantly. His own voice. I'm here, he said, though his throat felt tight. Listen, the voice said. You're going to see her. Don't talk to her. Don't answer. When you reach the intersection, turn off the engine. Don't. Static swallowed the rest. He hit the console, shouting, Don't what? The speakers hissed softly. Then another voice came through, overlapping the first. Hers. You've done this before, Jesse whispered. And you always forget. He gripped the steering wheel so hard it creaked. Then help me remember. The mirrors along the car's doors began to shake, vibrating violently. The reflections inside them blurred dozens of eyes staring back, all his. He shouted, Tell me what you want. The lights along the dashboard began to flicker in sequence, seatbelt, check engine, oil pressure, each blinking faster until they merged into a single red glare. The voice returned. Calm. Almost tender. Stop driving. He pressed the brake again. Nothing. The pedal sank to the floor. Useless. Please, he said. Just tell me what to do. But the voice was already fading, dissolving into static. He was alone again. The glass road began to crack. Thin white lines spreading outward from beneath his tires. He could feel the vibration travel up through the seat, through the steering column, into his bones. The mirror beneath him was breaking. Through the widening fissures, he saw the burned church again, its broken cross tilted against a black sky. He saw himself, standing beside a car, door open, waiting. He saw Jesse, stepping out of the shadows, smiling faintly, and then he saw the headlights, his own, bearing down on them both. The impact came without sound, just light. He opened his eyes to find himself sitting in the driver's seat again, the dashboard steady, the world still. The phone on the console blinked once, obedient as ever. Trip complete. He laughed, a small, hysterical sound that didn't feel like his. He leaned back, exhaled, pressed a hand over his face. Finally, the screen refreshed. New ride request. Pickup. Franklin Avenue and 12th. Destination. Redwood Apartments. Name. David. He froze. The air in the cabin shifted. A slow inhalation that wasn't his. The seat beside him creaked, softly. He turned his head. In the passenger seat sat a man. Eyes wide, skin pale as smoke. His own face. The other David smiled faintly and whispered, "Don't make the same mistake I did." Then, the world blinked, and only the empty seat remained. The sky was colorless again. That same ghost pale gray that wasn't morning or night. The kind that existed between shifts of time, where clocks could no longer agree on a direction. David's hands were still on the wheel. His breathing had evened out, but it didn't feel like breathing. It felt like something remembering the shape of air. The car hummed beneath him. Steady, patient, waiting for instructions he no longer had to give. He stared at the screen, mounted on the dashboard. The map was blank. Just a white expanse with a single blue arrow in the center, floating nowhere. And below it, the line of text still glowing. Pickup, Franklin Avenue and 12th. Destination, Redwood Apartments. Name, David. His own name looked strange there. Small, like it didn't belong to him anymore. He should have killed the engine. He should have gotten out, left the car in the middle of whatever this was, and walked until the city decided to be real again. But his hands didn't move. He just watched the arrow spin. Slow, hypnotic. Then, quietly, the phone buzzed. Ryder. Are you close? He stared at the message for a long time, then typed back with stiff fingers. Driver, who is this? No answer. He exhaled shakily, turned the key in the ignition even though the engine was already running. The hum deepened, and the headlights reached farther into the nothing ahead. Fine, he muttered. One last ride. He eased forward. The wheels rolled over a surface that didn't sound like road anymore. It was softer, thicker, like driving across frozen breath. The fog returned, slow at first, then thick, curling around the car in long white ribbons. He watched it coil against the windshield, pressing inward, until all the world outside was erased. Then came the sound, a voice through the radio. Not words at first, just static, shaping itself into rhythm, then syllables, then something almost familiar. David. He froze. The voice was his own. David. Can you hear me? He gripped the steering wheel tighter. What the hell is this? The radio crackled again. This is dispatch, the voice said, toneless. Pickup confirmed. Passenger waiting. He looked at the phone. The map had shifted. The blue arrow was moving now, guided by an invisible hand through blank streets that didn't exist. Dispatch, he repeated quietly. Right. He tried to laugh, but it came out cracked. Sure, let's do it. The car turned on its own. He recognized the shape of the buildings that began to form in the fog. Dark outlines, faint and incomplete, like sketches that hadn't finished becoming real. A streetlight, a crosswalk, and there, at the end of it all, the corner he knew too well, Franklin Avenue and 12th, the burned church. Its broken windows glinted faintly under the pale light. The chain-link fence sagged as always, and the charred skeleton of the steeple leaned the same way it always had. He parked by the curb, hazard lights blinking softly against the fog. The clock on the dash read 1:13 a.m. He waited. At first, nothing. Then the rear door clicked open. He didn't look back. He just heard the familiar weight press into the seat behind him, the subtle shift of suspension, the faint sigh of the door sealing shut. His phone buzzed once. Ryder. Thanks for coming back. He swallowed. No problem, he whispered. The seatbelt clicked in the back. The phone buzzed again. Ryder. It's strange, isn't it? Being both places at once. He blinked. What do you mean? No reply. He put the car in drive. The fog parted for him. just enough to show a sliver of road ahead. He pressed the pedal gently, feeling the car glide forward, as though it already knew the way. Minutes or hours passed like that. The world around him didn't change. The fog kept moving, but nothing in it stayed still long enough to become real. Every now and then, he caught glimpses of motion, a shape in the mist, the suggestion of headlights, the faint echo of his own car seen from another angle. Each time, he told himself not to look too closely. The phone buzzed again. "Ryder, you're quiet tonight." He glanced in the mirror, but the fog behind him was impenetrable. He could barely see the headrest. "I've had a long night," he said softly. "Ryder, it's always night here." The words lingered on the screen like fingerprints. He tried to ignore them, eyes fixed on the road, but his reflection in the windshield was changing. His face was paler now, thinner. His eyes didn't blink at the same time. He touched his cheek without thinking. The glass copy didn't move. The reflection smiled. Then his phone buzzed again. "Ryder, you can stop pretending. You're not the driver anymore," he whispered. "Then who is?" The seat beside him creaked. He turned slowly, the way a person turns in a dream against resistance, through water. The passenger seat wasn't empty anymore. Someone sat there, posture familiar, head tilted slightly toward the window. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, hair still damp, dark against the pale of her skin. Jessie, or what used to be her. He felt his chest tighten, breath catching in his throat. She turned her head toward him, and the movement was impossibly slow, like an underwater current moving flesh instead of air. Her eyes met his. He didn't recognize the color, if there even was one, just depth. She smiled faintly. "You made it back." His voice trembled. "What is this place?" Her lips barely moved. "Where all the rides end." He swallowed hard. "Why me?" "You drove through it," she said softly. "The night, the silence, the place where no one is supposed to look. You saw the turn, and you didn't stop." He shook his head. "I didn't mean to. I didn't even see you." Her expression didn't change, but her voice sank lower, threaded with something not human. "You did. You saw everything. You just chose to keep driving." The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows like a tide. The engine whined softly under the weight of it. "I can't fix it," he said. "I just want to go home." She leaned closer. "You are home." And he felt the air change then, a slow pulse that seemed to come from inside the car itself. The rearview mirror flickered, showing not the road behind, but a moving image. Another version of him, another car, another night. A loop of headlights on wet asphalt, each reflection showing another driver, another David, each one staring back at him from within their own version of the same car. The phone lit up again. "Ryder, it's time." "Time for what?" The reply came instantly. "Ryder, to switch seats." He felt his heart jolt. No. The car began to slow. He hadn't touched the brakes. The fog swirled, thickening into something almost solid. Jessie, if that's what she still was, turned fully toward him. Her hair drifted slightly, as though suspended underwater. Her mouth curved in a gentle, resigned smile. "Someone has to drive," she whispered. The lights inside the car dimmed. His reflection in the glass shifted again, this time perfectly in sync with hers. Two faces overlapping until they looked like one. He felt the weight of her hand cold, damp on his wrist. She guided his hand toward the gear shift. "You'll take me there this time," she said. He shook his head, but his body moved anyway. The car began to roll again, slow, unstoppable. The phone buzzed once more. Final, decisive, system message. Ride in progress. Driver, Jessie. Passenger, David. The name switch hit him like a physical blow. He tried to speak, but no air came. His vision blurred, white creeping in from the edges. The fog outside brightened into blinding light. He turned to her one last time. "What happens now?" She smiled faintly. You'll wait. Someone always calls another car. The world folded inward, light swallowing the cabin whole, and then silence. When he opened his eyes, the night had reset. Rain against glass, the hum of the wipers, the faint neon smear of a city pretending to sleep. He sat in the back seat now. His phone glowed in his lap, open to the Uber app. The pickup location was already filled in. Pickup, Franklin Avenue and 12th. Destination, Redwood Apartments. Driver, Jesse. He looked up. The woman behind the wheel had long dark hair, tied back loosely. He couldn't see her face, only the reflection of her eyes in the rearview mirror, calm, distant, unblinking. Evening, she said softly. David, right? He tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Her phone chimed once. She looked down briefly at the screen, then smiled. Just text me, she said. It's easier that way. The car pulled away from the curb. Outside, the burned church stood quietly in the fog, its broken steeple leaning toward the road like a finger pointing the way home. The phone in his lap buzzed once more. Jesse, do you see anything in the empty seat? He looked forward. The passenger seat glistened faintly under the dashboard light, smooth, undisturbed, perfectly waiting. He typed back with shaking fingers. David. No. Then paused. Deleted the word. Typed again. David. Not yet. And that was all of them. 7 stories, carried through static and sleepless air. 7 little hauntings, folded neatly into the hours between dusk and dawn. If you've made it this far, maybe you've noticed something. That every story tonight began with someone who thought they were alone. Someone who heard a sound that shouldn't have been there. Saw a face that didn't belong, or felt the weight of something watching from the dark. Maybe you've felt it too. Don't worry, that's normal. The mind likes to keep souvenirs from the stories it hears. Sometimes a sentence, sometimes a smell, sometimes just the faintest echo of breathing beside you. If you listen closely enough, you can still hear them, whispering under the static. The watcher, the runner, the voices behind the glass. All of them are looping back, waiting for the next listener. So when the music fades and the signal cuts out, and you find yourself staring at your own reflection in the dark, just remember, the stories don't really end. They only change frequencies.